record to this computer. All right. So, if there's any benefit to having the technical difficulties we had before, is I got to know you a little bit before we
Yeah.
start recording now. But I thought what the goals would be today. So I'm going to add an intro and all kinds of other
Yep.
stuff. So really what I'd like to be able to record today is how you ended up in the military
Okay.
and how that path led to you and Azeez meeting. And
Yeah.
then lastly, what were your experiences together? You heard the
Sure.
podcast from Azeez,
Yep.
and it'd be really interesting to kind of have a companion to that, to have you speak to some of the things that he mentioned. So this interview is not about me; it's about you. So
Okay.
have at it. Take us on your journey.
Okay. Wow. All right. Yeah. This is where I was having trouble last time.
No
So,
worries.
okay. So how did I get to the military was question number one. So how I got there is kid from Wisconsin, hadn't seen much besides Wisconsin, for, well, shoot, most of my first 18 years. Um, and started looking at what are ways to, after all the little kid dreams go by the wayside, right? When, like when you realize that you're not going to be a professional basketball player somewhere around like 14 because you stopped growing,
Yep.
you're like, okay, well, how can I see the world a little bit more? Um, and my dad had served. He was just a draftee in the 50s. And so it was kind of, a lot of uncles had served. So it was kind of one of those deals where it's like, well, this seems like an interesting way to kind of go after this adventure a little bit. So in high school, I applied for the academies. I applied for ROTC. Kind of knew I wanted to go the officer route, for no reason other than nobody in my family had gone to college. Both my parents hadn't gone to college. So it was kind of one of those, hey, if you're going to do this, can you please just go to college first? Because we we sure do think you're smart enough for this college thing. So why don't you go ahead and do that? So yeah, so that was kind of what got me there. Had my fun in Milwaukee, stayed in Wisconsin for college, had my fun doing Air Force ROTC, but also getting to do all the fun college stuff too. So that was nice. Um, Went to our version of basic training down in Lackland, middle of college. So got that first taste of, oh, holy crap, what did I get myself into here? But had some really good RTC instructors who had spent uh, a lot of time kind of operational military. So I mean, this is 80s. We're talking college for me was 96 to 2000. So like we're talking about guys that are kind of Cold War era guys that were kind of talking us through. But it was really good because they kind of gave me they gave us a really good idea of how to be more down to earth, I think, than maybe most enlisted guys that are going to hear this show are going to go, okay, it's another officer, right? And that's fair, right? Tony, you've talked to enough enlisted dudes who've done some way harder core stuff than I've ever done. But that was one of the big deals of those RTC instructors, both the officers and the NCOs that were there, was really kind of getting us all grounded because we were a bunch of Midwestern kids and most of them were in the same boat as me. So yeah, so I did that, graduated from college in 2000, and had a degree in computer systems. So the easy move was Air Force communications officer, which at the time was essentially did all your computers and your radios within the Air Force, right? And because I was computers, I kind of got tracked onto that computer side of communications. So I mentioned it the last time, right? What got me really thinking the military was great, and it's the silliest of reasons, is I left Wisconsin to go on active duty and loaded up my 1994 Cavalier with 130,000 miles on it in January, like 14th of 2001. Loaded that thing all up, left Wisconsin. It was 30 below zero. It was a 30-mile-an-hour wind with 30 inches of snow on the ground from the week before. I drove 2 days, 2.5 days later, I'm pulling into Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo, Texas, which not many people know about. And it's probably not even the size of a standard airport. It's so small. But it was my first base, no airplanes. You're going to hear this as a theme with me, is like I tended to be in the Air Force for 21 years and go to places without planes. But showed up there, and the gate guard said, "Oh man, sir, it's great that you got here when you did, because we're about to close the base because it might freeze tonight and it might rain, and that's here in Texas. We just can't handle it." Now, I tell you, Tony, I sat on the balcony of the base hotel, right? So the building there, in a pair of cargo shorts, a sweatshirt, smoking a cigar on the balcony. For my first day in the Air Force, I was like, "Yeah, this is gonna be all right. If we're already not working tomorrow and it's 33 degrees outside, this is gonna be just fine." Experienced some Texas weather though, so from there I kind of did. I started off, the Air Force did things a little different back then. You didn't go to school and go to training and then go to your base. They sent you to your base first. So they sent me to my base for 3 months before I was even trained. So I'm just a newbie lieutenant who doesn't know anything, and worse, I haven't been trained on anything. So, I went in there with whatever college knowledge I got from college, which it wasn't much. And, they handed me what they called plans, communications plans, which was basically just writing up how we were going to do things a year or two from now, and then being a project manager, which I learned very early on that is probably not for me, but that's kind of where they had me. And so, the best thing I got out of that was, again, I tried to talk about those instructors at ROTC. The first thing they gave me was, they're like, "Look, you're not really running anything, Lieutenant, because you're a lieutenant and you're an officer, but you don't really know anything." They put me with a really good senior NCO, Salvador Orospi, great guy. And he just sort of taught me how to run a shop and taught me how to be an officer. And I spent 6 weeks with him before I had to go to training. And he was just the best. Like, he just, when I did stupid things, he would just sort of pull me aside. Be like, "Look, you always, you're in charge, sir, but you screwed that up.
Yeah.
And I'm pulling you to the side because that's the right thing to do, right? That's how you should treat your NCOs." So, like, I don't know. I owe a lot to him and a lot of other NCOs along the way, but like, I at least got that lesson right. I think early on was like, "Hey, listen to the NCOs. They're gonna send you the right way." So that was kind of my first experience. I spent a year in San Angelo, moved down the road to San Antonio, which was much better. If you look where San Angelo is on the map, it's West Texas, and San Antonio, at least for a kid who's 25 years old, that's a lot more fun than sitting out in cattle country.
Yeah.
So there I had, when I got to San Antonio, I was a programmer again, which is what I liked doing when I was in college, and they made me a programmer. And what's funny about that is, not a year and a half later, or excuse me, a year and a half earlier, I was sitting in a room at training, and what they do for officers is they always bring some general in who's in charge of your career field, or who's in your area, and they're going to give you the wisdom to like set these lieutenants off for the next, for their careers. Cause like they're finishing their career and they're important and they know everything. And this general came in, General Dale Myros. He was a 2-star, and he asked the class, "Who in this class likes to program?" It's a class of 14 of us, and me and the guy who sat next to me, I guess 2 buddies, right? Me and my buddy, we raise our hands. "You will never program in the Air Force. You are here to be a leader. You are not here to do technology. We are not going to have programmers in the Air Force." He didn't even ask if I wanted to do it. He just asked if I liked to do it.
I love it.
And so, in true Air Force fashion, right, 18 months later, I'm a programmer again.
Oh
I'm
my God. After he chewed your guys' ass out for even considering being one. Oh
considering
my
being
Lord.
one, and
Right.
18 months later,
A programmer.
I'm writing Visual Basic and SQL scripts for flying training.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and um, yeah, that was an interesting start to things, right? I mean, and in between there, right, 9/11 happened, right? 9/11 sort of changed my perspective on some things too, right? I mean, 9/11 happened while I was in San Angelo, and I wasn't
Well,
really
how
doing
how
anything.
did it change your perspective?
Um, I sort of joined this for fun. Like I was
Ah,
trying to get out of Wisconsin. I
yeah.
wasn't trying to, I wasn't thinking about war, right? Like one of the things that I told my parents, right, who were all worried because I was an only kid, they're like, hey, you're going to go to war. And I was like, I'm joining the Air Force. Air Force never goes to war. What are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Um, and, when that hit and, that happened, and things like you just get like eerie quiet over San Angelo, right? Because we had an airport. It was a regional airport, but we had an airport, and those jets came in right over our base, right over Goodfellow Air Force Base, and that first week after, you just hear nothing.
Yeah. Yeah.
We also, I'm sorry, I'm jumping around, but yeah, we had another about September 13th, right? Everybody's on lockdown. It's taken an hour to get into the base, whereas before they just sort of let you pass right through. You could just walk,
Yeah.
you could just go on and off base. I mean, I'm pretty sure most of the, bases here in Colorado, like Fort Carson, were open at one time where you could just drive on through if you were a civilian, didn't care, and go off to the other side. That all changed, right? Um, I remember this poor old boy. He must have been some rancher, and it was right. Our communications building was close to the fence line, and it was like 7 o'clock, 7:30 in the morning, and he came screaming around a corner by Goodfellow Air Force Base and took out about 100 yards of the fence line.
Oh,
And I, you know, we're in West Texas, so I don't think anybody really thought it was a terrorist attack or anything, but boy, did he get treated like it was one. It was not a pleasant day for that guy. I mean,
oh.
security forces yanked him out of the car like
On a
like it
normal
was
day, we'd
just
be pissed about this, but now, given what's happened, you're lucky that we didn't light you up when you did that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Um, so yeah, so back to San Antonio, right? So now I'm in San Antonio, and I was there for 2.5 years doing programming, and I was happy with it, but it didn't feel like I was in the military every day, right? I mean, guys are starting to get deployed, and we're wearing blues every day. Like we're still wearing like the blue uniform instead of like the utilities that you've seen folks
So,
wearing
so
for.
what does that mean? Why is that? Why'd you bring that up?
So I brought it up because it's like you just didn't feel like you were in the military, right? You didn't feel like you were doing anything towards what was happening, right? I'm writing code for flying training, right? To measure statistics and metrics of pilot candidates, like demographic information, who's in class and who's out of class, right? And it's important stuff,
Yeah,
but it's not, you know, it's not, it's not what you joined for, right?
I got it. I got
Especially
it.
after 9/11 when we were all pretty juiced up about what happened and we wanted to do something about it.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that was, you know, I got it in my head that, I wanted to go do something about it. And I was kind of stagnant, sitting at Randolph Air Force Base writing code you know, for pilots who also weren't really doing anything anymore for the cause. They were all either, broken pilots of some kind, like some medical issue or something there. And we're all just on a staff, just, sitting in our cubicles, doing whatever our, basic task was for pumping pilots out through training at the various training bases. So you just didn't feel very connected to the war effort. So I started volunteering for deployments. I wanted to go somewhere, anywhere. And again, had a really good NCO, Gary San Antonio in San Antonio. I'm not making that up. It was a
Oh,
funny,
that's his last name. His last
that
name
was
was
his
San
last
Antonio.
name.
Oh,
Gary San
okay.
Antonio, and we were in San Antonio.
Starting like the movie Catch 22, and you got Colonel and Major and all that.
Yep. Yeah. A little bit like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
We had Tech Sergeant Gary San Antonio in San Antonio.
Love it.
Uh, he was like, look, man, if you really want to get into this, go deploy, go volunteer to deploy. If you can't volunteer to deploy, go take a short tour somewhere. And right. And because I was a single guy running around dating and stuff at that point, he's like, and here's where all the beautiful women are. Because if I could do it again, right? Uh, right. So I'm getting these advice from, you know, guys in their 40s and I'm 25 and they're like, here's where I would go if I was you, right? So you know, officers, you get to choose where you get to go, right? And my boss was very knew kind of what I was looking for, knew that I wanted to get out of there. Normally you'd have to leave at 3 years. And he was like, look, Steve, we're gonna get you out of here at 2.5. I had some personal stuff happen too along the way, and they're like, look, let's get you out of here because otherwise, there's not much more we can give you here. You're the only lieutenant. There's not really a pool of your peers. Like, let's get you out into the operational world a little bit. So, taking the advice of my trusty NCOs, right? I was like, where are all the beautiful women, right? So number one choice, Iceland. Number two, Turkey. Number three, Korea. And where the heck was number four? Oh, number four was Honduras.
I'm
So
sure there's some people thinking about joining the Air Force right now, and they're probably writing these places down right now.
yeah. Some of these are closed already. So right, this is 20
Okay.
years ago at this point, right? So this is 2003-ish time frame, right?
Right.
Well, and this is where I like, this isn't the part of isn't necessarily the part of the story that I'm too much of a fan of, but this is kind of just how things happened, right? Is like, so I've got all of these, single guy garden spots that I'm going to go to, right? But I'm dating a girl in San Antonio at the same time who gets pregnant.
Oh my Lord. Okay.
Just at the same time as I get orders to go to Turkey unaccompanied.
Oh my. Sometimes the timing of things just don't always work out well for us.
Right.
Or the order
Right.
of operations, right?
Not great, right? So, that's my boy's mother and all my boys' mother. And yeah, so like, well, we went back and we asked, so like, hey, so this lieutenant wants to leave early. He wanted to go on a short tour somewhere by himself, which short tours are like a year instead of like 3 years, 3 or 4 year assignment. And he wanted to go by himself. And now you're telling us he wants to go, but he wants to go with his new spouse.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. And I was like, what? So, they said yes, but it cost me a year. So instead of a 1 year assignment to Turkey, I'm going to do a 2 year assignment in Insular Turkey. Back then, you kind of had young officers kind of had to be secretaries for a little while. So basically, they made you the base commander secretary. So that's what they sent me to Turkey to do. So like, I got to sit with with two really good colonels for a year and just listen to how a base is run. It's a really unique job. It's also thankless, and I'm not good at it because it's a lot of organizing paperwork and, things like that. And like as my boss said, one time, he's like, make me some coffee. Cause that's kind of the job. It's like, oh, it's the making coffee job. It's, wing executive officer, make me some coffee. So yeah, I made him coffee and he goes, you don't drink coffee, do you? It's like, no. He's like, you better start drinking coffee because that coffee tastes like shit and I'm never going to ask you to do it again. It's like, okay, good. Well, I got out of that task. That was easy.
Right.
So I'm in Turkey now for 10 months. My son's born there. That's a story in and of itself, but I'm not gonna bore you with that. He got medevaced out because we found out that the Turkish medical system was not nearly as good as they said it was to the Americans. So they decertified Turkish hospitals from allowing military and military spouses to give birth there. So the boy's mom, Joe's mom, my ex-wife, she got medevaced out at exactly 9 months pregnant, like about 6 days before the due date.
Oh man.
And yeah, and they were good about it because they let me go along, right? I got out of work for a couple of weeks to just sort of sit with her. And, my son Joe's first flight was on a C-130 back from Germany to Turkey. But yeah, so I did that job for close to a year. And this is when things started really getting hot and heavy because we're in Turkey. Turkey didn't let us use them when we invaded Iraq. We're 2005 now. Um, and the Air Force still needed people downrange. So further downrange than Turkey was, right? Because Turkey was it wasn't really in anything, right? We didn't really have anything going on. We had some air refuelers that were going in there, but there was nothing really, not, we couldn't do anything because of the political situation at the time between Turkey and the United States. So I got a, I got deployed from Turkey down to the United Arab Emirates. So that was my first deployment.
Mm.
Ex-wife was not pleased because she's sitting in Turkey where the only kind of coffee has like a silt in the bottom of it. And I'm calling her from the United Arab Emirates drinking Starbucks at a Starbucks downtown every other weekend. So that she wasn't a big fan of that.
Yeah.
She also wasn't a fan because we um, we were expecting another kid when I got deployed. So
Ah.
I missed my son's first birthday because I was deployed to UAE. Um, that's going to be a recurring theme. Um, but yeah, so went there and then came back from Turkey. Again, I was just kind of doing that executive officer thing where I was basically somebody's assistant for that deployment. Not super hardcore or anything, but it was nice to actually feel like we were part of it. It was a base that had at the time it had U2s and it had a bunch of refueling jets on it. So I got to see U2. Unfortunately, I got to experience my first time dealing with a casualty of someone because we lost one of our pilots. I was the ops group exec. So the ops group is the folks that fly the planes in the Air Force. And we had a U2 go down. We lost the pilot, Major Dwayne Dively.
Oh.
And we had to go out and when that happens, again, computer guy, I don't know what happens, right? So I learned all about all the safety boards that happen when an aircraft crashes and all those things. And I mean, it's a U2,
Yeah.
right? It's a U2. It's got some sensitive stuff on it.
Yeah.
So, that scene, I'm gonna make light of stuff again because that's what I do, but that scene in Spaceballs where they're combing the desert?
Yeah. Is that
We
what it
had to do
was?
that. We had to do that over the crash site. So,
Wow.
stand in a line trying to find a few very, very small, very, very sensitive components and, 150 people across a line. And I still remember coming over a berm at that crash site. We came over a sand berm. It was me and two of our NCOs and my one buddy, another captain. We came over this berm and it was a camel that had a camel skeleton, full camel skeleton. It must have gotten hit by the blast, and that jet
Oh.
engine of that U2 took it out, took everything off of it, and it just fell down in place, like a full skeleton of a camel just down in place in the sand. And we're like,
Oh.
whoa,
It got blow torched by the crash.
yes.
Oh my Lord. Talk
It
about,
blew me away. I was like, whoa.
talk
So
bad day for that camel. I mean, that's some
yeah,
pretty random shit
I mean,
right
it was a
there,
bad
right?
day all around the board, but I was like, it was
Yeah.
one of those stories where I'm like, holy crap, that's what
Yeah.
can happen.
Yeah.
Um,
Was this
so
was this an operational accident, like a failure of the plane, or was it something that happened over, or can you even talk
so
about it? I
well,
don't even
so
know.
I can talk about it now because it was all adjudicated back in 2005. But the U2 pilots were on really, really long missions, right? And they're, that's I mean, these guys wear the spacesuit, right? This is the Francis Gary Powers, just the newest version of it, right? Thing. They're wearing basically a spacesuit, curvature of the Earth stuff.
Hmm.
But once they're up there, it's basically a glider, but it was a glider on these 10 and 12-hour missions.
Yeah.
And what they believe happened is Major Dively fell asleep flying
Yeah.
just because he was so damn tired.
Yep.
Because it was way longer than their mission. Their missions are only supposed to be like 8 hours, and we were flying them at like 11 and 12 hours, just because that intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance coverage that they wanted, just required that.
Yeah.
And yeah, I get the theory is that he started descending and then woke up and realized he was kind of in sort of like a fatal dive But then before he could try to get himself out of it, he just passed out because of just the sheer force of how he was falling.
Yeah.
I believe that's the case. So, right, again, memory, it's 19 years ago, so memory's failing me a little bit, but I remember talking with a lot of the U2 guys, and that was kind of their assessment, plus what I think we got out of the accident board was something like that. So,
Mm.
he was doing God's work trying to get up there and do that. And he was a Marine pilot who had jumped over to the Air Force because he wanted to fly the U-2 because it's such a unique plane. So
Yeah.
a lot of those guys, I found out a lot of those guys actually weren't career Air Force guys. They were just dudes who um,
Wanted to fly the U2.
wanted to fly the U-2 because it's so cool, right?
I
Like it's just, yeah,
I didn't know that. I don't even know how many U2s we have in our inventory. I didn't.
I don't either.
I remember during the Gulf War, well, the not the
Yeah,
first one, but the one you're talking about after
yeah.
9/11, where we started to get engaged in Afghanistan and Iraq. I remember starting to hear about things like the U2 again. And as someone who grew up during the Cold War, I thought those things were gone. But
So yeah, like I got that deployment was cool because I got to see refuelers. I had seen refuelers in Turkey, right? And like and again, this is like kind of my first airfield. Goodfellow Air Force Base didn't have an airfield. Randolph Air Force Base did, but I wasn't anywhere near it. I was running, I was in a cube writing computer code.
yeah.
And Turkey didn't have anything going on except some Turkish air refuelers and a couple of American, supply planes that would come in, but that was it. Like it
Mm.
wasn't anything. But man, you get out of your tent in the morning and you hear you knew. I would know because we were ops group. I would know when the U2s were going up. And like you're walking to breakfast and you just hear like that rocket engine just take off because it'll go up, but then it immediately goes vertical. So
Oh,
you'd see it just clear the runway and then just boom, you'd just hear it go and then it would go straight up. It was
amazing.
pretty cool.
It would
Yeah.
be. And I mean, how many U2s did you guys, how many were even available then to operate? I don't
I
even
don't even
know.
remember how many we had, to be honest with you. I just remember every morning watching them take off, right? Because
Yeah.
there'd be morning and evening sorties. And then I'd remember a couple times I'd go up in the tower because I knew I had a couple of buddies who worked in the tower. And they still, because they still have the long wingspan. And for years, they've always had high performance sports cars that sit on the side of the runway. And as the U2 comes in, they're on the radio with the pilot because because the wingspan's so wide that if there's not somebody talking to them on either side because the pilot can't see it, they might tap on either side and crash. So like at the time it was two souped up Camaros and these things would go screaming down. So you'd see before you even see the U2, these things would start moving. And then all of a sudden the U2 comes like screaming down and these cars just take off next to it. And the guys were telling me the squadron commander, because he'd been flying them for years, he was like, yeah, it used to be you had to like actually jack you flew they were convertibles and you jack a wheel
To
for them
hold
to
the,
actually
for the wings, to keep the
for the
wings up.
edges. Yeah.
So if they did
Yeah.
land, they have. So talk about badass. There's no way any of our listeners know this. I'm sorry. And
Yeah.
if I mean, you're telling me that you had high performance sports cars, Camaros, ripping down the runway, giving audibles to the pilot to make
Yes.
sure they didn't like flop the
Yeah.
wing on the tarmac.
Yeah. And again, computer guy who's just like computer guy, young, like what was I, 28 then? I'm learning all this stuff. I didn't know
Yeah.
this stuff. I'm in the Air Force. I didn't know this stuff either. Like
My.
it was a cool first deployment because I wasn't in danger, right? Like that was
Yeah.
kind of the thing.
Yeah.
And so, that made for, hated losing Major Dively. We had some other stuff happen along the way there that was, nobody got hurt or anything, but it was just like, it was an interesting deployment in a lot of ways because I've never been that close to a flight line again.
Yeah.
Right. My boss was a tanker pilot for years, right? And he was great. We just really good people in that unit. We had a tanker pilot. We had two tanker pilots. We had a boom operator was in our group. Our chief master sergeant was a boom operator. Our first sergeant was a JTAC in the first Gulf War. So he had been a forward air controller. So he was kind of what now is Air Force Special Ops. It was just, and then me, the computer geek, and building them databases and stuff and getting coffee, which I could
Yeah.
make by then, by the way. I learned how to make them. Um, yeah, destroying classified in the microwave. That is that at the time for us was our approved classification destruction method. So I became the guy who threw CDs into the microwave and cooked them for 5 seconds and pulled them out. And
And that's how they would sterilize them. That's how
that's
you
how
would get rid of those.
that's how we sanitized because
Sanitize them. Yeah.
we didn't have our own sanitizer.
You just nuke them.
Yeah, we just nuked them, right? And then we made our soup in there afterwards, right? Which, probably something wrong with my digestive system because of that, but whatever, it's fine.
Right.
Uh,
Oh.
so yeah, so get back from there, came back, was no longer, after I'd done that job, it was 15 months in kind of that aid job, went and jumped over to communication squadron, started doing computer stuff again, was running a post office because that's what you do when you're in communications overseas. You also run a post office. So ran a post office, but by then it was time to come home. Had my second son, Lance. By then, though, it was time to come home. It was 2006, and I'm still a computer geek at heart. And there was a place called the Standard Systems Group in Montgomery, Alabama, and that's all they did was write code. It was code writers, and it was all projects around all heavy technical projects for an Air Force network. And because I had just been overseas, like all that adventure that I wanted in San Antonio, after I got it for 2 years in Turkey, and
UAE and all
having
that.
young kids in Turkey, like babies in Turkey, it wasn't great. And I was like, you know what, let's slow this down again. Let's go back to what what you're good at. A little safer life, right? So I go to Montgomery, Alabama. I'm working there on some neat projects that are computer related that the listeners will not care about, I can guarantee. But about a year and a half after that, I get sent to Iraq again. This is about 2007. And that one was very much I was a watch officer, and that was my first experience deploying with the Army.
So what is a watch officer? What was your job?
Watch officer is a guy who sits at a desk for 13 hours.
Oh.
And gives a status on whatever their expertise area is. So mine's communications and networks. So what am I got? Everything in the Iraq theater that's coming in from 6 p.m. until 6 a.m. I'm reporting up to a colonel who sits in this place, this Joint Operations Center, right? So if you've heard of those, right? Giant room in Al Fawad Palace outside of Baghdad. Giant room, 300 people in it. Everybody represents something, a function or a unit. And so, there's not a lot to say about that deployment. It was cool because I turned 30 there. I deployed with two friends from Alabama, Tony Bean and Gerald Vallow. And so I went there with buddies, essentially. I went there with two other guys who hadn't deployed to a combat zone before.
Okay.
This is the first, we experienced the fire and stuff that you'd expect to see. I promise I'll get there faster, Tony. I'm sorry, I'm going slow.
No, we're just running tape. I don't.
Okay.
It doesn't bother me at all. I'd rather capture a lot more and then maybe or maybe not use it than miss something.
Cool.
So don't worry about it. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I was just looking at the clock. So
no, I'm fine.
Cool. So in Iraq, right, I'm there with a couple of buddies, which makes it a little bit better, right? I'm not deploying alone, which was cool. Tony and I both had young kids. Jerry was a senior master sergeant, so his kids were older and stuff, so he wasn't as concerned. But kind of being able to bond over that and always and having sort of a built-in set of friends there was really good. Because it was a combat zone, and we found out quick. It was I think it was the day after Thanksgiving, which means we were there probably 8 days at that point. The gym that we went in, somebody had just taken a shot from over the wall, and they got the firing shots in the air, and it just came down and the luckiest shot in the world and hit one of the folks that was just walking into the gym.
Oh, just a stray bullet that was fired maliciously, but it happened to hit one of our soldiers.
Yeah, indirect fire hit one of the soldiers, killed him, and then we're like, oh man, this got real in a hurry,
Yeah.
We would get indirect fire a couple of times a week, right? So that's rockets and mortars that are coming over the wall, right? So they're not shooting at anybody in particular. They just know there's a big there's a big green spot
Yep.
where the Americans are, and by God, we're gonna put as many things over that wall as we can, right? So
So
we had
about
those.
what could you just comment a little bit about what was
Yeah.
going on in Iraq at this time when you were at the JOC?
Yeah, so at the Jock there, so this was the end of the surge.
Okay,
So we got there month 12 of that first group of Army dudes who went for 15 months.
got it.
And we were the first group of Air Force people who had moved from 4 months to 6 months. So they were none too happy with us Air Force guys because we were like the third or fourth version of Air Force guys they had seen at this point.
Hadn't thought
Right.
about that.
You know, they were there, they were supposed to be there for 9 months, then it became 12 months, and it became 15 months, right?
Yeah.
So we were catching the end of the surge. So what was happening there in Iraq at the time was it was a lot of, and Petraeus had just come back too, right? So this is Petraeus coming back, running multinational force Iraq, and you know, his idea, and General Odierno, who was the corps commander who we worked for, their idea of there was so much sectarian violence that we should let's get the Iraqis to, you know, sort of fight for their country, right? That was the claim, right? So this idea of Sons of Iraq, right? Which Sons of Iraq were the Sunnis, who basically were like, look, the Shias were taking over and committing all this violence, all the Sodderists, that kind of stuff is happening. And then so all that stuff is happening. We gotta, you know, we gotta do something about it, right? Like, so we got all these Sunnis now that we then sort of mobilize to prevent
I mean,
violence, essentially.
my
Yeah.
understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong because you were there, I wasn't,
No, well,
is
I'm losing it right now because so much has happened where I'm
no,
losing
there's
what was going
and
on.
it's incredibly complex and dynamic. But my understanding, because I just did some research on this for the Azeez series,
Yep.
my understanding is that basically we had the Sunnis who were a minority group in their own country, Iraq. The majorities were the Shias,
She is.
to basically join forces with us to act as a counterinsurgency against a counterinsurgency, to
Correct.
basically get the country to have some amount of security again,
Just stability again. Yeah, just
stability.
stability and security again. Not, and I guess yeah, I would say stability, not security, because like we weren't even trying necessarily for it to be secure. Everybody
Yeah.
knew it was a war zone and was going to keep being that way. It's like, can we keep these people away from killing each other, right?
Yeah, and us,
Yeah.
and every permutation you can imagine between these
Yep.
groups. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
And
like that's
and also, I think, tell me if I'm wrong, the other thing that they were trying to do at that point, more than they had ever done before, was say, not only do we want to quell the sectarian violence, but we want to start handing this stuff off to
yes.
whatever Iraqi government is formed, so we don't have to
Yeah.
be seen as an occupier anymore.
Well, and so that was the thing that I found like super interesting about my time there during that time is like I learned a lot about how Army networks, communications networks worked, and I learned a lot about like what does it really mean if something's down, which, you know, in commercial IT, it's like it's either down or it's up, right? There's no in between. Like, you find out with military nets, and I actually said it to somebody at work today. They were like, "Have you ever seen a network as bad as this?" I was like, "Yes, in Iraq."
Yeah.
um, was how we were running the country, right? So you're right, we were trying to hand it off to the Iraqis, but you know, General Petraeus at that time was the de facto king of
Yeah.
Iraq.
He
Like
was like MacArthur was in Japan after
100%.
World
He
War
was
II.
essentially
Yeah.
a viceroy, a
Yep.
military leader, however you want to look at it. That's who he was. So, you know, there was this thing called multinational force Iraq. They ran the country. They were down in the green zone and they ran the country. That was Petraeus's guys, right? And we were out at Al Faw Palace over by the airport on the other side of town, basically the west side of Baghdad. And that was multinational corps Iraq. And multinational corps Iraq ran the war. Multinational force Iraq ran the country.
Ah, interesting distinction.
So when you get into like, because again, this is the jock, right? And I'm just one small cog, but like you get everybody in the room and they're briefing Petraeus on the status of the war. And Petraeus is also taking briefings from from his other entities on the multinational force side. And it's very much like, here's General Ordierno, another 4-star, briefing him on the status of the war. Like, here's where we're doing with the war. Here's where, where we're taking ground, where we've gotten into skirmishes and troops in contact, right? And then you flip it over and he's talking to his, State Department and UN guys about how we're getting food in and how we're running, how we're running logistics at the border of this country. Like, it blew me away. I was like, holy crap, we're like running a country and running a war at the same time. And I didn't get that at all.
So
like,
this is what's funny about you veterans, because I'm not a veteran. I never served.
Yeah.
But you started off talking about this period when you served as, oh, I'm sorry, this is running long. We'll get through it and all this. And now we're talking about this, that you had a front row seat. You were in these big rooms that were full of these people making these decisions at a really critical time.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds pretty important to me.
It was cool. Like, I look at it as like, I got to be kind of a pedestrian, right? Or a pedestrian, not a pedestrian. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I got a front row seat. You said it best. I had a front row seat, and I literally was in the front row.
Yeah.
So like, I did have the front row seat. The giant screens are in front of me. I'm looking up at it, right? And it's, and I mean, the thing about it too is like, I was doing communication statuses for the whole theater, but I didn't run or control anything. I like, 30-year-old Captain Bichler who's trying to be the best darn Air Force officer there is, and I got kids and stuff, so I'm going to try to make this a big career and, become the highest rank that I can, and all this stuff that I thought I cared about. Like, I'm just, at the end of the day, I am just a dude, a cog in a machine trying to make this thing all.
But isn't that what most people in a military organization are? I mean, the bottom line is, it's another misconception that people have. I think everyone thinks you join the military, you have a rifle and you're shooting at people. But for every one of those individuals, you've got 15, 20, or 30 that have to support them.
Yes.
I mean, and networks, communications, that sounds pretty important to the information age.
Yeah.
And that's what you were in charge of, right? You had to do
and
that.
it was,
Right,
but I mean, like, ultimately, right? I mean, like, when you in the grand scheme of everything that was happening in a country, like, it was just a very. It was you felt as small as you should, right? I guess I'll say that, right?
Okay.
And I can't imagine, I mean, and then then there's just like dumb Air Force guy stuff that happens along the way too, right? So like, I'm out for a run around Camp Victory, and I'm a pretty, at the time especially, I was a big time distance runner. I really like to run distances, right? And I'm out on a run, and the alarms go off, right? And I'm like, incoming, right? And I go, I'm not wearing I don't have my vest. I don't have anything with me, right? We didn't wear that stuff when we were just walking around the base or working out or anything. So like, I just flat dive on the ground. Convoy of infantry dudes that are about to go on God knows what patrol, right? Drive by me. Dude opens the window and goes, "Hey man, you all right?" I was like, "Yeah, man, they just let the alarms just went off." He's like, "Whatever." Closes the window, drives off. I'm like, yeah, that's where I belong here. That's my role in this whole thing.
Oh my, they must say, hey, you know what? You made their day, right? They probably saw it.
Hopefully,
hey, look at that Air Force guy over there. What's he doing?
Right. Yeah, look at that idiot. Yeah. Right. So I mean, there's a lot of those kind of moments, right? But I mean, ultimately, that was close to 7 months I spent out there doing that. And it was I never felt like you felt scared, right? Especially after the first couple of, attacks that we'd had. But, it was so impersonal. I was just like, all right, if they get me, they're going to get me. Like, there's nothing I can do, we're just, I'm walking to work. Like, if it happens, it's going to happen. My friend Tony had, unfortunately for him, like he had one that was really close, and I know it really bothered him because like he heard it. He heard the one rocket sort of like do the whiz, because it's just a hiss, and you just hear like, and it's over you, and then it blew up like probably 100 yards from his trailer. And in the Iraqi compounds, I mean, he had to see all the Iraqi first responders try to do their thing and stuff in there. So I mean, he got the worst of that one when it came to that. But me, I was, I was standard Air Force deployment mode, it's like, what did I do? I went on my 12-hour shift. I ate 4 meals a day and I worked out like a crazy person when I wasn't trying to sleep. And that was
Yeah.
the end, right? It was lather, rinse, repeat every day. Nothing really crazy. Now, that being said, I get back home from that deployment, finish out my time in Montgomery, got picked to do a special Air Force thing where they sent me off to industry for a year. Did that. That was cool. And then got sent to Fort Meade, Maryland, right? So home of the NSA, all those things. And our unit was an NSA direct support. And I mentioned this last time, but this is where Azeez and I start, where the stories start to converge a little bit. So if you worked inside the NSA for an NSA organization in an NSA support unit for the Air Force, you did not have to deploy. It was just given, like, look, they're waived because they're doing this NSA job. NSA is important national security in the United States. They're fighting the war inside the NSA buildings.
Yep.
That only works if you pass your polygraph.
Uh-oh.
Now, I eventually did pass my polygraph.
Okay, but it sounds like you didn't quite pass it at first.
I didn't pass it the first 3 times. I'm a very anxious person generally with a lot of Catholic guilt.
Oh my gosh, you are a perfect case for a false positive on a polygraph test.
I have all of the, and by that time, I went from not drinking coffee at all like 5 years before to now I'm sucking down like 2 pots a day, right? So it's
jacked
like,
up, guilty, anxious.
All the problems.
Oh.
So when I finally passed, it's great. I passed, and then I had a medical issue, had some surgery, and I was on convalescent leave, right? Which is, hey, you can't do anything until you get, off of, until you're in a good status, right? And literally the day I got off status, I get deployment orders. Even though I passed my polygraph, I'm on clear medical status. I'm about to go to my NSA job, and down comes a deployment for Basra, Iraq. And this is where we start, this is late 2010 now. So November-ish of 2010.
And this would have been, just really quick, so this would have been a couple of years after the surge.
Yep.
And it would have been when, we were still trying to tamp down sectarian strife, but we were also trying to win hearts and minds and then move the Iraqi government ahead to be its own entity. Is that about right?
That's about right. And and it was very, it was the Obama administration then, and he was very, that he campaigned on that in 2008. Like, look,
on getting our troops out.
We shouldn't have went to Iraq in the first place, and we're getting people out. And look, there's a great majority of us, I think. I shouldn't say majority. At least my feeling was, as a service member, I was like, I'm okay with that, right? Like I rode for George W. Bush for a while, but after that 2007, 2008 in Iraq, and I was like,
you're like, uh-oh.
Probably shouldn't be here. So it's 2010, and I'm going to tell some stories from training training sounds stupid, right? But like, so a bunch of Air Force guys, all of us are not combat people, right? We're all being sent to be advisors in our discipline, right? So again, I'm not a shooter. I'm not a special force. Like, that's what Green Berets were made for. Green Berets were made for foreign internal defense. Go teach people, go teach a foreign military how to be a foreign military, right? Well, because those guys have been so chewed up by, at this point, 10 years in Afghanistan and 8 years in Iraq, like, they're all doing direct action stuff. There's none of those people around. So these MIT teams, these military transition teams, just became a thing that, hey, we got to have somebody advise these people.
And is that what you're being trained to be? Was part of the MIT team?
That's what we were being trained to be, right?
And was this a new thing that was developed just for this deployment, this thing?
No. So this thing has been around. So I ran into the MIT teams my first deployment in Iraq, and I'll give you how my deployments went, right? So I will tell you this. Like, this is how my first 3 deployments went. In 2005, I'm leaving Turkey, and we actually took Turkish Airlines from Adana, Turkey to Germany, and then got onto a military plane and flew down to UAE.
Okay.
But we did all of that in civilian clothes. So I'm flying through Al Udeid Air Base, the main transport and hub essentially of moving people around the theater. I'm there in civilian clothes.
Mm.
I'm flying into UAE in civilian clothes, and I'm in the terminal in my collared shirt with my belt, like a good Air Force officer should, in his khakis. And I look over and I see this young staff sergeant, and she's throwing her vest on, and like she's right next to me. She's got the bulletproof vest on, she's got the helmet and the gear, and I was like, "Hey, Sergeant, where are you headed?" She's like, "Oh man, I'm going to Balad." And I was like, "Oh man, you're going to Balad?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm going to Balad." I was like, "You must have it good, sir," because I'm in my civilian clothes, and I did. Right. And I was like, "Oh man." And when she got on the plane, she went to go to her plane. I went to mine. I was like, "Man, I sure am glad I'm not her."
Huh.
Fast forward 2 years, I'm on the back of the C-130 with my bulletproof vest on with my buddy Tony and Jerry, and I'm her.
Ah.
I'm flying into Iraq. I'm
Yep.
flying into Camp Victory.
Yep.
One day I'm at Camp Victory and I am on the bus, and the bus took you around to like the three bases that were there: Camp Victory, Camp Liberty, and Slayer and Sather. Four bases.
Slayer. Love it.
Yeah, Camp Slayer was cool. It
Yeah.
was all intel people too. It was like the least Slayery place. But anyway, um, they I'm at a bus stop, and about 8 people get out of the Humvee, and they're just ripping the vest off, like dropping their gear, running to the bus, and they just all just sort of slump into the seats. And I was like, "Hey, where are you guys at?" And they're like, "Oh, we're a MiTT team down in like southern someplace, Adamia, I don't know, someplace south of Baghdad, right? Baghdad suburbs, essentially." And I was like, "Holy cow." And they went their way and I went my way, and I was like, "Man, I'm glad I'm never those people."
And
You
now
know
here
where
you are.
you know where the story goes from here.
You, you are going to become one of those people.
I'm
So
about to become one of those people.
so when you made this deployment that would get you, to work with Azeez, how did you know that this was part of a NIT, you'd be part of a
Oh
MIT
yeah.
team before you deployed?
Oh, as soon as I saw military transition team, and I was like, "Oh no, it's those people." Right.
Oh,
I was
wow.
like,
So here you are.
eh,
I want to make sure I understand this. Here you are. You finally get your polygraph test. Whatever injury you had is you're convalescent, you're fine.
yep,
You're thinking you're going to do some cool stuff stateside and get all spooky with all the
yep,
technical stuff. And not only are you being deployed overseas, but you're going to one of these teams that you're seeing people just getting dragged through the dirt in.
yeah. And on the orders it said high probability of casualty, high probability of capture.
Oh my gosh. What
So
a
I'm
change of fortunes you had.
yeah, and I'm handing this to the to my then wife, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Well, by the way."
Let's make sure our insurance is ready to go.
Yeah,
And here's our will and testament. And
yeah.
oh my
And,
Lord.
and and of course I had the squadron commander who was like, "Don't worry, Steve, I'm taking care of you. This isn't going to happen to you."
Yeah.
It happened
Yeah.
on my birthday, 2010. I'm flying to Fort Polk, Louisiana. If there's anything to know about Fort Polk, Louisiana in the wintertime, it is probably the exact opposite of Iraq in the summertime, which is where I
Uh,
was headed.
yeah.
So fall of 2010, it's all combat training, right? So basically they took a bunch of support weenies, right? Personnelists, com systems guys like me, logistics guys. We had some military police, Air Force version of military police, and it's all Air Force and Navy. And they dropped us on an Army base and had a bunch of infantry sergeants
Mm.
who apparently thought that it was basic training again, or that they had, whatever axe they had to grind with the Air Force, or not joining the Air Force when they were 18. They were going to take it out on a bunch of, now I'm a major at this point, a bunch of field grade officers and NCOs, senior NCOs for the Air Force. We were salty. Did not like them. They did not like us. We have been at this for a while. We're like, "Tell me the stuff I need to know."
Yeah.
Um, that being said, right, it's culture shock world, right? So we're in, you know, Azeez, right, has had an amazing journey where he became an interpreter for the Americans from his time there. When we were in Fort Polk, Louisiana, we ran into an entire Army career field called 9 Limas. These were native Arab speakers from all of these countries, or from Arab communities in the United States that were joining the army, some of them to get citizenship, but were joining to be interpreters in that regard. So I thought I was going to get a military interpreter, right? Because that's what I learned in training. So we would grab the interpreter. So we'd get an interpreter who knew Arabic. We would have us, and they would train us on how to talk to the Iraqis. So we have these interactions with former Iraqi army, like think the old Ba'athist folks that, we kicked out in 2003. There was a bunch of them living outside of Fort Polk, Louisiana, to do exactly all of this kind of role playing to teach these support guys like me how to be advisors to the Iraqis, right? So, I mean, they had all the crazy stuff like throwing shoes at us and stuff, trying to teach us Arabic, right? So we had Arabic speakers trying to teach us Arabic. I got a little bit, like, it's still like, it's still like going, trying to speak Spanish at the resort in Mexico more than anything else at this point. When you're in Fort Polk, he's like, I'm trying to learn this language, but I'm not really immersed in it. And oh, by the way, the 3 hours, a day that I'm getting of Arabic culture and being Iraqi culture and being an advisor and all that interaction is coupled with go to the range and shoot all the guns that you've only shot a couple of times in your career, go through all of the combat stuff, right? So, they'd load us with misfiring weapons. We had to learn the 50 cal. We had to learn the grenade launcher. All of those things fun, by the way. Fun story. Again,
Right.
because we didn't like the NCOs that were teaching us and they didn't like us, right? They put me on the 50 cal for familiarization because I wasn't going to be a gunner. They decided at that point in training I wasn't going to be a gunner. I was going to drive, right? So I was going to drive. So I was driving Humvees and MRAPs around. And but they still wanted us on the 50 cal because anybody could have to go on the 50 cal at any time because somebody gets shot, pull them down, somebody has to go up and man the gun. So they gave us what was called familiarization fire. So we get like 200 rounds. And I get up there and I do my 200 rounds, whatever. And, this really cocky Army NCO comes by and he goes, "Sir, what'd you think?" And I was like, "It was great, Sergeant. It was just like sex. It was awesome. I felt like a god and it didn't last very long." And I walked off.
Oh,
Um,
oh,
so and I was like, all of us, we had this sort of like back and forth with them, even the military translators, right? These Arab kids, because they would put us in these scenarios like where you're in a town and you have to go meet your Iraqi counterparts to try to talk to them about, maybe stopping the fighting or something like that. And there would be actors from in Louisiana. So like, I'd be like, "Hey, Abdul, go talk to that person there because they're getting a little too close to us and tell them to back off," right? We're like pulling patrol or something. And he goes and speaks perfect Arabic to him, and they just like blah 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 blah, like just because they didn't speak it. They're just
yeah,
people from the town.
yeah.
And he's like, he just turns to me, and goes, "None of these people understand." And I was like, "Oh, so we're just gonna get blown up." And that's exactly what happens. Like, boom, you got blown up. Or here's the casualties. Do all the casualty stuff like that. So like, it was that kind of stuff that we would have to do there.
But hold on a second. This sounds really intense, though. I mean, look, not only are you having to learn how to be a soldier, which
Yeah.
was something, it wasn't your MOS as they call it back in the day,
Yeah.
but you're also having to learn a different culture, a different language. I mean, what was the biggest disconnect or the biggest culture shock thing you learned about having to be an American in Iraq that most people wouldn't appreciate, that you were like, holy crap, that's a really bad thing that an American could do over there?
Um, it wasn't like there wasn't like a big one for
Yeah.
me. The biggest thing that I learned is don't say no.
Oh, really?
Hopefully don't say no.
Huh.
Because there's, and I learned this when we got to Basra to the Bayok as well, was right. Don't say no and don't say inshallah. Right. So no means it is never going to happen. Maybe means it's still going to happen. And that the culture in Iraq is very much, you don't give definitive no's. Definitive no's, I don't need to talk to you anymore. So if I
Wow.
tell you no, Tony, right? If I tell you no, then like we're done. There's nothing, I got nothing to talk to you about. Why should I even advise you? or why should I even humor myself of talking to you as my advisor? Because you're not going to give me what I want.
I'll be
So
damned.
everything was maybe, or let me think about it, or let me see what I can do, or let me go back to my bosses and see it, right? Because that's how they did us too, right? It's like I never got a yes.
Yeah.
Never really got a yes. Um, so it was learned, that was the big lesson in training that I learned. It's like, okay, I can't say no.
I'll be
I
damned.
can't say no.
Because
And
you're right.
then
Here in the United States, no, it just simply means, well, for now, we may
no,
not consider that. But there's been so many things that people say no to that eventually, I mean, we can sway around that more. But what
yeah,
you're saying is over there, that's it. That's the death
that
of
was
that.
it, especially with Americans, right? Because, and it was more of an American thing than anything else, right? It's like if I
Really?
was bargaining with you in a market, we could say no, we can walk away, we can do all that stuff, right? It's like, you know, conquerors in the Middle East, when they have said no, like, oh, we're done here. We're done talking about it. There's no value you can give me if you say no.
I'll be.
So that was my big takeaway from training.
Yeah.
Um, was that and just knowing that, like, and look, I was communicating with the guy who was there before me. And I was like, well, what's the one thing I can't do? He's like, don't say no.
No kidding.
And so we just, and that'll get into how sort of advising went, but like you just went into this whole dance of back and forth of like maybe, and you just get closer to a yes, but you never really get to yes, but you never are at no either. So it was
Hmm.
um, a really weird way of thinking about war, right? Because I'm like, I didn't think I was going to be in a sales negotiation,
Yeah.
for
And
my
you are. And so when you went to training for MiTTs, what was your role? What did they say your job was supposed to be when you got over there?
keep things stable, get them the resources they need to sustain a conflict themselves. That's where we were at, right? We're moving into 2011. There's starting to be rumors that we're going to pull out.
Yeah.
Not in 2011 like we did, but like there's starting to be those rumors, right? And Iraq was relatively stable, right? So I mean, there was MiTTs that were going to Afghanistan and MiTTs that were going to Iraq, right? MiTTs that were going to Iraq, we were talking to Iraqis in a in a trailer, right? In like an office complex, right? Because we were going to headquarters. We were going to go talk at the headquarters. The ones that were going to Afghanistan were still doing Afghanistan stuff. So those MiTTs were like learning to be village, talk to village elders and stuff like that, right? So that was like it was even two different tracks within the MiTT training. Because it's like if you're going to Afghanistan, you're gonna see some real shit like in the
Yeah.
villages. You're
Yeah.
going to Iraq, you're going to a military headquarters, you're going to be talking to senior level people. That's why we're sending senior field grade officer types into those areas. So it was a completely different set of even people, even the types of Air Force and Navy people that were in this training with me, because it's like, oh, you're a junior NCO. Let me guess, you're going to Afghanistan, aren't you? Yes, I am. Okay, cool. Like
So let's
that's
talk about that too. So the people that you're training with, which ultimately go to Iraq, describe where they came from. I mean, were they from all branches of the service? Did you notice any sort of pattern like, hey, they got a techie here and a grunt here? What was it like?
no, so it was all the support disciplines, right? So it was mostly Air Force. We were about 80% Air Force,
Oh,
about
okay.
20% Navy.
Okay.
Um, Actually, even more than I think it was like 90-10.
Huh.
And it was right. So, the joint staff model, and I don't know if anybody's talked about this on your show before, right? Is there's J directorates, right? So there's J advisors, right? So J1 is personnel, J2 is intelligence, J3 is operations, 4 is logistics, 5 is plans, 6 is communications, which is what I was. 7 is training, which usually kind of rolls in with 3 in operations, and then eight is finance, and 9 is civil affairs and medical.
Hmm.
So that's any military organization, any joint military organization, that's how it's broken down, right? So that's how we taught them too. So if you're going to an Iraqi regional headquarters like the Basra Area Operations Command, like I did, like you're going to fit in one of those directorates because we made them go into those directorates because we organized them the new Iraqi army the way we wanted it to be, which was like us, because that
Mm.
makes the most sense for us.
Right.
And so think all of those different disciplines is what we had, right? So we had a couple of pilots that were becoming operations advisors because pilots are operations in the Air Force, right? Intel, we had a few Intel field grade officers that were there. We had some communications NCOs. We had some Intel NCOs. Like it was all of those disciplines, but for the most part, it was techies, personnel folks, medics, a lot of medics.
Mm.
And then that's kind of how they taught us, right? Is to go from there. One that was unique was I had a roommate in training. He was going to be an operations advisor, so he was going to go give them advice on ground operations, right? So he was going to go to Afghanistan and help them learn how to fight, basically. He was a missileer, Tony. He'd
What?
spent a
In a
missileer. He was
like in a
a
silo?
silo guy. Was going to go to Afghanistan and teach these guys how to be grunts.
Ooh, so I guess everyone was stretching out a little bit on this deployment,
We were,
huh?
I mean, this is about the time where, everybody's sort of stretching out, right? We're really, look, I'll say it, right? I mean, you probably wanted an army communications guy to advise the Iraqi army on how to do army stuff, not a guy who learned tactical radios in training,
Yeah,
who just happened to working on computers for the last decade,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Who
yeah.
just came from the NSA of all places, right? Granted, I wasn't in those things, but right, but
But that was your path, right? Your path
that was
wasn't
my
to
path,
do communications for the Iraqi military in a
right?
transition team.
Yeah.
So was this deliberate? Do you think it was their way of saying, "Hey, we got a bunch of trained, intelligent, like you said, mid-grade field officers. We're going to treat them like Swiss Army knives," or was it just like a military kind of weird snafu thing that just happens once in a while?
No, it was a little bit how the Air Force deployed people, right? Because the Air Force, right, the Army deploys as a unit, right? The Army deploys as a unit. And by the way, the Army's fixed this since then, right? They've got these things called security of force assistance battalions now and brigades
Oh, okay.
that basically there's not going to be mid teams in the future because hopefully because we got these brigades of people that are just in all of these support disciplines to do this work.
Ah,
The Green Berets can't, right? Because that was
yeah,
the thing. It's like we tapped the Green Berets out on direct action, going and shooting guys in the face, which wasn't their primary mission, right? Their
yeah,
primary mission was supposed to be like this kind of foreign internal defense, build up the militaries of foreign countries, right? But they were too busy taking out terrorists, right? So, and we had a two-front war. So how do you go about you pull from where you have? And the Air Force was an individual deployment model. So Army deploys as a group, Air Force deploys onesie twosie, right? So
hmm,
you know, it was rare that three guys would get sent to the same place like my last deployment,
hmm.
where three of us got sent together to Camp Victory. That was super rare. Everybody else was like, "You guys know each other? That's awesome! How cool!"
I didn't.
This
I didn't.
deployment, though,
I,
yeah.
I'd be willing to bet that unless we have listeners who are in the Air Force, they would not have known that. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that there was a
For,
different. Yeah,
for everything except the pilots, right? So if you get a
yeah,
pilot, the pilot's gonna be like, "I don't know what Bichler was talking about. Like
right.
we deploy together all the time." Well, yeah, you did because
Because you're in
like
a squadron, you're training
in a
together.
squadron with
Yeah,
with your bird, right? I'm in a squadron, but it's just a squadron of people.
yeah,
So like it's a body pool, right? So they put us where they wanted us, right? So that was I left on my birthday on November 28th of 2010 and came back to Fort Meade in February. And I had 3 weeks before I left for Iraq, right around what was it? Yeah, right around the end of March.
okay.
So 3, 4 weeks. And yeah, and then um so yeah.
So did
So
you did you deploy with a team? Did you leave the MITS training with a team, or the teams formed over there in Iraq?
team's already there, right? So
Got it.
there's a mid team there, right? There was a
Yep.
crew of Army folks that made the core of the team, and then the Air Force folks came in every 6 months, right? So
So you were
there's already not team continuity per se. I trained with one person, an intel lieutenant colonel. I trained with one person in Fort Polk that ended up with my team.
so that's really interesting. So tell us a little bit about you get to Iraq. tell us where you went and what your first impressions of it were.
Sure. So do the whole thing, fly into Qatar, right? I'm by myself again. Um, get to Basra. Don't know anybody in Basra, and I know that I'm not where I'm supposed to be, right? So fly into Kab Basra, which is the main base. Kab Basra is the main base, but I know I'm not there. I'm at this place called Joint Security Station, Basra Area Operations Command. And I'm like showing people at the terminal my orders, and I'm like, hey, I'm supposed to go here. This isn't where I'm supposed to be. And they're like, yeah, whatever, go. Finally, an Air Force senior master sergeant, and I think he was a major at the time, another major at the time. They come out of a truck and they see me there by myself. The entire plane's gone, by the way. The Army guys have left. The Army guys have left. There's a couple of stragglers, Air Force guys. They found their way because they were supposed to be on that base. And this truck comes up, and it's this Air Force senior master sergeant and major, and they're like, "Are you Bichler?" And I was like, "Yeah, it says so on the name tag." I'm like, yeah, I'm 26 hours in or whatever. They're like, "Cool. Hey, we talked to the Bayok guys. We're going to tell them that you're here. I'm going to take you to a temporary tent I think it was a temporary trailer, and you're going to fly there probably tomorrow or the next day, right?" And so, yep, they took care of me, got me around and everything. But then, whether it was a day or two later, I don't remember now, but they put me on a helicopter, and I've never flown in a helicopter before. And I've got all my, my 5-6 bags of gear. Because other fun fact about Fort Polk in the wintertime is they issued me a bunch of cold weather gear that I had to take that I couldn't turn in Kuwait when I got to Kuwait.
So you're dragging all this crap around, and now you're in the middle of the desert right now.
Yes, in the desert in March. I'm going to be there March through October initially.
Oh.
And so they throw me on this Black Hawk helicopter, and we take off. And about 10 minutes later, we're twisting a little bit, and I drop down in this place. All it is dust and tents and brown. And there's an Army guy there, and he goes, "Hey, I'm Scott. Why were you guys shooting flares off?" And I was like, "We're shooting flares off?" Like, yeah, you guys were firing flares off. I was like, "Holy shit." Oh, he must have got shot at. What?
It's like, welcome to Basra, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. And you're there to win hearts and minds and advise people and do all this stuff, and you're getting shot at on the way in.
Oh yeah, on the way in, right? And so that's we get in there, and get a tent, get set up, go over. Now it becomes just daily military stuff, right? But like the daily military stuff is just completely different because we are living in tents, like 9-man tents, right? And Azeez talked about this because Azeez lived in a tent a couple tents away from me, right? Where he said he stayed on base all that time. His was kind of an open bay 30-man tent where they just got a place and all the interpreters sort of just slept in that tent. We were at least partitioned, so I had my own space, but it was an 8-man tent. So, I had a chair and I had a bed that somebody left behind and a little desk and a fridge that over time, because somebody allied had been there since 2004. So, right, the British had the compound first, so we had all the keep calm and carry on, signs all over our tents and stuff, because that's legacy from the British, right?
No, I did not know that.
Oh yeah, they put that up. They put that shit up everywhere. That isn't just a World War II thing. They put that up everywhere.
That's a thing.
Oh yeah, if you go to a British compound or anywhere where there's British military, there will be a keep calm and carry on.
I did not know that. So
at least up until 2011, yeah.
Okay, so over time, you guys would accumulate and be able to reuse the stuff that was left behind.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Like somebody gets a fridge downtown at some point from an interpreter, maybe, right?
Yep.
Drops it off, plugs it in, right? Now, hey, it's there until it breaks, right? Yeah. We had a 55-gallon drum of God knows what that somebody had cut off with a welder and made into a grill that we had acquired at some point over the previous years, right? We had one of our contractors who was a retired special forces guy. So they didn't leave us completely alone. They had given us a couple of guys who were retired Green Berets to kind of, hey, not just your 3-month course at Fort Polk, but we're going to give you this contract where you're going to have 2 or 3 guys that kind of know already how to do this, so you guys
Okay.
aren't completely on your own, right?
So you kind of had a security detail then.
Well, they weren't even a security detail, right? They weren't really armed. They were, oh shoot, lost you there for a second. They were there to their job was to teach us how to teach the Iraqis, right? Basically,
Ah,
like an evaluator, essentially, right?
I
If like
gotcha.
like, hey man, I think you could have done that better, right? And kind of get us through those first couple engagements that we'd have with folks. And to just give us advice on being in theater, living with the Iraqis, because again, American compound, I think Azeez talked about this a little bit, but right, American compound, probably about 20 tents, about 200 people total, right? So there's 2 transition teams there. There's ours for the Army. So we were advising the Iraqi Army that ran the Basra Area Operations Command. There was a police transition team that was monitoring the Iraqi police and kind of doing the same thing that we were doing, but doing it for the Iraqi police. And they were all Army guys. They were Army guys. They were there. They were going to be there for the year and stuff. And that was their deployment. They went as a unit. We went again individually. So American compound, the big sandbag barriers, essentially the HESCO barriers, separate us. There's a roughly 100-yard walk. You leave the American compound, if you want to call it that, of tents, and we would walk the 100 yards across the street and go into the Iraqi compound and start trying to be advisors. And we'd have our office in there with where the Iraqis were. They were living there and working out of there. So, Colonel Yahya, who I advised, I'd go to his room and he worked out of his room. And, he had a bed in there. We'd sit on his bed. I'd be advising him in his underwear sometimes. He wasn't going to get dressed. I'm not wearing, like, for a while, we were supposed to wear body armor, right? And things changed throughout that year. But then it became, look, they can't advise these guys can't come off as friends to the Iraqis if they're just walking around strapped all the time with body armor, helmet, M4, the whole deal. And we saw the difference, right? Because the police team was under sort of different ROE than we were with, and it came down to different commands, because Iraq, there was all kinds of different commands. So we worked for Baghdad because we were Army advisors. So we worked for U.S. forces. At that time, it was no longer multinational force Iraq. It was now U.S. forces Iraq. So we worked for U.S. forces Iraq out of Baghdad. We advised the Army. The police advisors worked for whoever was in the region at the time, which was whatever Army commander. So their ROE was whatever was going on for the combat troops that were still patrolling, the security troops that were still patrolling in the area. So those police guys, they had to go in completely strapped all the time. We had a better relationship with our folks than they did. And Azeez talked about this too, about how when the Iraqi police didn't show up, we kind of knew something bad was going to happen.
Yeah. Well, so
there was Americans that were supposed to be helping, but like they didn't have much control because they didn't have that level of trust. And that gets back to the whole never tell anybody no thing, never come off in a way. Like I brought my M4 the first day because I thought I had to. And I was in a meeting and it fell over. and the Iraqi general who ran it was like, you get out.
Really?
And yeah, and it wasn't Azeez who was interpreting that. I think it was Bilal who was interpreting. And he was like, he would like you kindly to pick up your weapon and leave the room. And I was like, he did not say that.
Not at all.
Say that. Which is a great intro into like the trust aspect with guys like Azeez, right? So it became really hard. If I'm going too long, Tony, please tell me. I can. It became that of like figuring out who to trust when you're in that environment, right? So we weren't getting shot at every day. We weren't getting rockets coming over the fence. I think we got, for the 8 months that I was there, I think we got hit twice. I want to say twice. Once for sure. Maybe a second. I think the second time was more, it was one of those we didn't know we got shot at kind of a deal. It's kind of like the helicopter ride in, because we just came back from a convoy and there was a giant bullet wound in the trailer that we were pulling behind one of the MRAPs. And we're like, oh, looks like we got shot at and we didn't know. Then became the question with our intel guy of how long has that been there? And we're like, I don't know. How long has it been there? What do you think?
Yeah.
But that was kind of that became, it became a multi-pronged approach, because it became, how do I talk to my Iraqi advisor? Like, how do I advise this Iraqi colonel? Because he's a colonel, I'm a major. How do I advise him? What does he want? What are his goals of this whole thing? What are his goals of this relationship? Then how do I convey that message to him? How do I know that my message is getting conveyed? Right. Um, and I'm not going to talk trash about Bill, because it was either Bill or the other guy whose name escapes me right now. But whoever said that, no, it wasn't Bill, it was the other guy. Whoever said that, like, really nicely to me, like, oh, Major Bichler, would you please leave the room and pick up your weapon? General Mohammed is not okay with you having a weapon that is uncontrolled in that manner. And I was like, that's not what he said. I've been chewed out by generals before. That is not what he said. I picked up my weapon, I walked out. Everybody laughed at me, right? Like, everybody got a good laugh.
Yeah.
Our colonel, Jerry Kidrick, just kind of gave me the knife hand. He's like, don't fucking do that again. And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I won't do that again, right? Like, peace. I'm not bringing, right? And then it became the reality of the situation, right? Is like, what's that M4 going to do for me?
Hmm.
I'm literally in the hallways. If one of our guys described it as, you remember that movie with Jamie Foxx and Jason Bateman, The Kingdom? Jason Bateman's getting pulled down the hallway of this really dark, dank Middle Eastern hallway.
Hmm.
Okay, well, it's a really dark hallway. Um, I can send you pictures if you'd like, but like, just it looks like the corridor of a horror movie, right? It's like, what's an M4 going to do for me, right? By the time I pull it up, somebody's going to be on top of me, right? Carry your pistol, right? Carry your pistol, carry it loaded, you know. Um, Around the same time, there was a big explosion of blue on greens in Afghanistan. So, Afghanis attacking their U.S. advisors. So, like, that
Oh,
was in our minds at the time, right? The only Air Force communications or cyberspace officer to be lost in the 20 years in combat was lost while I was there. And I knew the guy. He had replaced me in Turkey, Charles Ransom. So he got killed in Afghanistan. So it got really real for a lot of us that were in sort of support positions, because it was that whole thing. But that was in Afghanistan, right? That wasn't here. But we're hearing this news, so we're like, man, we're walking in, no vests, no armor, but we got to maintain this relationship, and we got to do this. So we go with our 9mm, and you hope for the best. And that relationship with the interpreters became so important, because you needed to know that somebody was going that somebody was conveying your message appropriately. Because as soon as you got the impression that your message wasn't being conveyed, I didn't want to work with you anymore.
oh, really?
There was, and I'll be honest, like Azeez, I think it was the second or third time where it's like, okay, I can trust Azeez,
Oh,
right?
really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, because you don't trust anybody, right? Like the drawback of that training in Fort Polk is basically the undercurrent is you can't trust anybody who's local, right?
Wow.
You can't say no, but also you can't trust anybody, right? Everybody's trying to pull one over on you, right? Again, it's a sales call, right? So it's like everybody's trying to get one over on you. So you don't want to, I hate to say it, like, you don't want to get got, right? You don't want to be not got killed, but you don't want to get screwed over either. You don't want to promise something you can't deliver. You don't want to have to go back to your commander and be like, so anyway, I told them that I was going to get, power units for them. Now I got to figure out how to get power units. And like, oh man, dude, you promised something you couldn't deliver on, right?
Ah,
And so if you got the impression that your interpreter was not, one, either able to convey the message, and for me, if it's all technical things, right? Like, the biggest thing that the Iraqis needed was uninterruptible power sources, right? The things that you drop out the back of a server rack to just keep the power on. Like, we went from, Tony, in the course of, in October of 2010, I was thinking about what cool NSA thing I was going to do against, what cool cyber hacker thing I was going to do, to April of 2011. And I'm just like, how can I keep the power on the servers?
it it's so how did you how are you able to determine that you could trust one of the interpreters? Like, let's take Aziz, for example.
Yeah.
How did you know? What sort of things did you see that signaled that, okay, this guy is someone that I can trust?
if I could tell that they were delivering a message, like Azeez said in his, he's like, some people wanted me to deliver the message exactly, and I know who he's talking about, by the way, and that guy was not a good advisor. But if they were delivering the message and you knew that they were getting the correct points across, right? So for me, if I'm talking communications, computers, and radios, I wanted somebody who could talk technical to Colonel Yahya, the colonel I was advising, or his really, really obnoxious lieutenant that he had. But like, I needed to know that if I'm talking about bits, bytes, servers, electronics, that I'm going to get, like, he's not going to, glaze over those things, right? And that's why after about the second or third time, I was like, okay, Azeez understands technology, right? And having talked to him a little bit, in our rooms and stuff and in the compound, I was like, okay, Azeez understands technology, because I was very elitist at first, and I got told like, hey, you can't use the American interpreters all the time because we had John, and I told you about John originally. John's a psycho, and you should absolutely interview him because he's amazing. He's amazing. Oh, we'll get into John later if you need an intro, but John was an engineer. John was an electrical engineer by trade, right? That's when he moved from Lebanon to the United States, he got an engineering degree, electrical engineering degree specifically. It was like, okay, I'm talking about electronics. I'm taking John. Yeah. Why am I fooling around with these local Iraqis, right? Like, they might know the dialect better, but like, I need somebody who can translate electronics to another guy who knows electronics but only knows Arabic and doesn't understand me. So I'm taking John. But eventually everybody was like, dude, you can't keep taking John for everything. Like, we need him too for things that were, particularly because the American interpreters like John, who were already American citizens, could do secret. So if there was messages we had to translate into Arabic that were technically secret messages that we were passing to the Iraqis, they needed to do the translation. So I couldn't just take them for an engagement with my Iraqi colonel.
So how did you ultimately get paired up with Azeez? Did you work with a bunch of interpreters?
I worked with a bunch. We had four. Okay. We had four local national interpreters. He mentioned the one guy's name that I forgot. We had Azeez, Simon. We had Bill, who's Bilal. Both of them are in the States now. We had another guy, and I don't know where he is, honestly. But I tried everybody, right? I would try everybody. John had a counterpart too named Abe, and I would try him out because Abe was another American interpreter, but Abe was classically trained and was a liberal arts guy. So I never liked using Abe because I was like, the dialect, Abe's Egyptian, the dialect's different. He doesn't understand technology. And I know he's not telling, like, Colonel Yahya and I would look at each other with Abe in the room and be like, yeah, we're both saying something to each other, but it's not getting across this. It's not making it across this circuit. Like, again, electronics guy, right? Like, that circuit's not closed, right? We can tell that something's being sent, but it's not getting received on the other side. So, right. So I eliminate that guy, right? So now I've only got one tier 1 interpreter, John, that I can use. Then you look at the pool of 4 guys that we had, and they changed out a little bit, but like, Azeez knew America, like, he knew American culture. So he understood slang a little bit, which was kind of nice. Kind of goes to his whole thing where him and his cousin were, supposed to be interpreters together, but then, the cousin couldn't speak formally enough. Azeez could speak formally, but he could also understand technology. And I think part of that being a diesel mechanic beforehand, part of like just being around both American consumer electronics technology, which he told me he had a bunch of, right, was enough for me to be like, okay, of these 4 guys, if I can work with Azeez as much as possible. And you never knew, right? It's like, if Colonel Yahya came to my office and there wasn't an interpreter there, which there normally wasn't, right? There was only 4. It's a team of about 20, right? We're about 18 folks. 2 Americans who are mainly doing translations, and then 4 other folks. So like, Colonel Yahya would come bebopping around the corner from his office to my office in his headquarters and start talking Arabic to me. And I was like, hang on. Like, we had a whole hand signal thing going on for a while. I love that dude. He was great. Like, we had a whole hand signal thing going on and all the craziness that comes with it. But like, we still couldn't talk.
Yeah.
Right. So, then it's, hey, get an interpreter, let's go talk right away, right? So it's like, especially early on when you're building a relationship with these guys, if they wanted to talk to you, like give me whoever you got. Like, let's go, let's go. I don't care who it is, right? I learned to become selective about it because I was like, okay, I could, John was always number one for me. Then it was Azeez. Then it was Bill. And then it was the last guy. And then it was Abe, which is sad to say because I would have actually taken all the Iraqis over Abe because for what Abe never, like, as soon as Abe started going, inshallah, 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 I was like, Abe doesn't know what they're saying. He's not relaying what I'm saying. Like, I can't do this anymore.
Yep.
Hope Abe isn't listening. Sorry, Abe, if you're still around. Right.
Yeah.
Because at least all the Iraqis were all young kids for the most part, right? I think the oldest guy we had that was an interpreter was maybe 35 or 40 at that point. So for the most part, it was like DJ for a little while, but then DJ left us. Azeez and Bill were all kind of in their late 20s, early 30s. And it's like Azeez was really young. Azeez was in his early 20s.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, like I think these guys will kind of understand us a little bit more than say the older guy he was the one who again had politely told me, right? I lost trust with that guy right away because
Right away. Because you're like, that's not what he said.
Like, I know I screwed up, but that's not what he said. And I don't know if
Totally.
I can ever trust you in a room when I'm doing it. Now, that doesn't mean I didn't use him because if Colonel Yahya wanted to talk and Azeez was off with James Briscoe doing operations talk and John was translating something and the other two guys were, in the middle of something with another advisor, I'd be like, all right, I guess I'm grabbing you, and
Yep.
like, and as the deployment progressed, like I could tell Colonel Yahya got it too, because he would be like, okay, like we're not going to get as much done in this session as I wanted to because of who's the interpreter.
Yeah.
And it really came down to performance over time. Like eventually, towards the end, it just got down to be like, I want Azeez, I want Azeez, I want Azeez, I want Azeez, or I want John. Right? It was John or Azeez, John or Azeez, John or Azeez. Right? That was just how I operated at that point. And Colonel Yahya and I got into a rhythm where we were able to work that out because I'd meet him for what was his breakfast around like 11 o'clock in the morning. Colonel Yahya was a weird guy. He wasn't too interested in working, right? He was one of those Iraqi colonels who was like, he was in the Iraqi army during the Iran-Iraq war. He wasn't in the army at the end of Saddam, like, and then got back in the army after the US was in charge, right? Yeah. So he was like, he had been a colonel, then he'd had a break in service, then he was a colonel again after the Americans took over, right? And he wasn't even really that well respected among his peers. He was just kind of this goofy, funny guy. And I could relate, right? Because like the thing about being the comms guy is always like when comms are down, like there's never a good day. There's either a comms are up and it's
expected.
It's expected,
right?
Or comms are down and you're a piece of shit and you failed the mission, right? So I could get why it's goofy. Like I understood it. Right. So like we had a pretty good relationship to the point where even towards the end, we just didn't even do interpreters for certain stuff. They were like, I'd say, I think I said business. Like we had gotten to a point where he understood business. I was like, business? And he'd be like, no. And like, then we just go and eat, right? I think it was Azeez who was with me though, like, but we still did stuff, right? There were things that we had to do, right? So the Iraqi personnel department lost their entire personnel database. Of course, it was an access database in 2010 that was on one guy's computer because that's how the Iraqis rolled.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, can I help your personnel guys recover the database? Because there's ways to do that. Oh, there's no way to do that, Steve. It can't be done. There's no possible way we could do this. And so, I'd go back to my tent and I'd get on my personal laptop and try to find open source tools that I could give them, right? Because I can't give them any of the government stuff. And so I got him this recovery software one time and I was like, look, I don't have to do it. It should be you, right? Because I'd finally learned it. I was like, the reason he doesn't want me to help them is he doesn't want the American to help him. He wants him and his guys to do it. Yeah. All right, we can do that. Cool. So I give him this recovery tool. I was like, give me your laptop. I'm going to recover whatever's on here. If I can recover this, then you take this to the personnel guys and I'll show you how to do it. And if it works here, you take it to them and recover their database. You'll be the hero, right? And he's like, yeah, whatever. He's like, no, that it's never gonna work. It's never gonna work, right? And he was an old radio guy. I mean, he's at that time he was in his 50s. I'm 33, I think, at that point.
Yep.
Pop in the USB, pop the console up, and it was an easy GUI based data recovery tool. Hit recover, and it starts populating files. He's like, oh, Azeez is interpreting. Azeez is play by playing this for me. He's like, oh yeah. See, it's this file and this file and this file, and then I started opening files, and it's just like blonde girl in a bikini with a wet t-shirt. topless girl. And he takes the laptop as soon as he sees it, slaps the laptop shut. He says, oh, my son must have got it the last time I was on leave. Azeez is laughing over there, like it was one of those moments. But then, he actually went over and took it over to those guys. And that was like a huge win for me as a guy who does computer forensics now and does hacking things. Like for me, I wasn't that good back then, but it was a really nice start to this of like, hey, I can do something for these folks to help them, right? We would teach them Windows classes, but we quickly learned, right? So it was 2011, so we knew that midway through the deployment, we knew we were leaving at the end of the year, or whatever was going to happen, it was going to change. And so I was like, man, they've been getting taught Windows. I was like, I had to ask Colonel Yaya one time through Azeez. I was like, how many times have we taught you Windows? He's like, well, my guys, they don't really, they don't know. It's probably best. And I was like, can we teach you something else? Can we teach you anything else? Like, do you guys need to learn? I had an NCO, David Alston, great dude. Still supports the military. He's just not in anymore. He's out in Albania just doing cool stuff out there, comm stuff. But he was a good Cisco networking guy. So we were like, hey, we're going to teach you guys cabling. Has anybody ever taught you cabling? So like the A and B standard of network cabling of how you roll a Cat5 and cut the pieces yourself. Because I got to tell you, Tony, like this might be getting into nerd shit. So stop me if you need me to stop at any point in time. But like I got there and you're assessing the situation of what you have. And so we also had the responsibility of keeping our comms up. So it wasn't just advising the Iraqis, but we had to keep our stuff up as well. Because we were on a separate network than the compound. And I walk over to this panel and it's just Cat5 just shooting out of the window in all directions. There was and power cables, like all just shooting out of everywhere. And cable runs are just, nothing's tied off. It's all just, something broke, you don't even bother pulling it. You just like leave it, cut it, pull it out of the switch, run a whole new line, right? So we had all this cable, and so I just gave them cable, and we taught them. That one wasn't a great class because we had Abe as our interpreter, but we had diagrams. David wrote the whole class up. It was all in Arabic. I think Azeez helped translate it for us. And, we walked these guys through how to cut and crimp Cat5 cable, and we felt really good. And we're in this room of about 20 Iraqis, and this one was towards the end of our deployment, and I'm going to jump around on interesting stories that involve Azeez and the interpreters and kind of from there. And this guy was doing it perfectly. It was his warrant officer, Hyder. Hyder was awesome. He was crimping down cables, cutting custom lengths, measuring, doing all the stuff we wanted. And at the end of the class, after we got it all done, we thought we had done the best job any American had done of teaching these guys something new that they hadn't learned. And we're accomplished advisors right now. And in a room full of computers, Tony, the chief warrant officer of the Iraqi communications unit at Basra Area Operations Command holds up a piece of Cat5 cable in front of my face that he had just crimped down and custom cut for a run between two computers that we had there, a computer and a switch. And he goes, so what do I use this for anyway?
Oh boy, there was a detachment there, huh? Between who you were teaching and what they knew and what they were supposed to know. Holy crap.
But at the
Oh,
end of the day, though, Colonel Yahya thought it was great. I mentioned power. Power was a huge thing because the power would just go out and then all the server racks would go down. That was another one of another. Most of my Iraq stories from this deployment are cables getting cut. I've learned over time
yeah.
because we were leaving at this point, and the
But
main base.
let's talk about that really quick.
Yeah, yeah,
So Azeez spent a lot of time being frustrated by the fact that you guys were leaving. He felt
yeah,
like the US Armed Forces were leaving too soon. He felt like it kind of helped foster chaos. He was
yeah,
saddened by it. I mean, what were your thoughts when I know you're going to go home and all that, but I mean, if
yeah.
you thought outside of your own place in there and looked at the big picture, did you feel like it was time to go, or did you feel like maybe we should have stayed there longer?
I was super mixed about it, right? So I was very immediate in my thinking because at the time, my thought process was first off, I kind of went through this period of time where it's like, wow, like we're gonna go, like I'm gonna go home. Like I got here in March and I'm gonna go home in September, early October, and we're leaving in December,
Mm,
and I'm gonna make somebody else come out here for like 6 weeks. Like, I don't want to do that.
yeah.
So the journey for me is I had to go through, while I'm in Iraq, I had to go through approvals with my squadron commander back home, the Air Force squadron commander, because all of us Air Force guys, we didn't report to the Army directly. We reported to an Air Force commander in Kuwait and to the Army. So, the old office space adage of 8 bosses, yeah, that was kind of going on too. But I had to get approval because I was like, I'm just gonna stay. Like, and one of the reasons to stay is, because this is now my second deployment with the Army. As you get into interviewing more Iraq war vets, you will never ever meet someone who was in the Army in 2003 who wasn't in the invasion. So
Mm.
everybody talks about the invasion, the invasion, the invasion, the invasion, right? And I was kind of sitting there and I was like, after like thinking through the whole, like, I don't want to send somebody out here for like 6 weeks and make them go through 3 months of training for a 6 week deployment. I was like, I'll just stay. And they were like, well, you're going to have to take an extra 6 months if you stay. And I was like, yeah, whatever. It's probably not going to be 6 months anyway. So like, fine, sign me up for a year. My family was back with my now ex-wife's family back in Texas. And I was like, all right, like, let's just do this. They're stable. I'm kind of enjoying this. I'm kind of good at it, I think, or is good enough to know that somebody else shouldn't have to learn how to do it for 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, hey, let me stay. So I was very inclined of like, let's get as many people to stay and sort of finish this. Or if we're gonna draw down, like when David rotated back in October, he had no desire of staying. I don't blame him. He was stationed in Germany. He had German beer and Fraulein's waiting for him back at his base. He had no intention of staying. I was like, cool, we're canceling your replacement though. I'm just gonna go it alone as the communications advisor for the last, however long this goes, right? Um, we didn't think we were leaving. I'll just say that for the longest time. I didn't think we were leaving until probably we moved from the JSS Bayok October 15th. And that's when it started to get real to me that we might actually not be staying. We had every intention that our team was going to be there into 2012. Like
Mm.
100%, we were like, there's no way we're not going to be. These folks are still so far away. They need our help. We're already trained. Why wouldn't you just keep us here? Right? You know, Especially if you're going to move all the combat forces and you've moved us onto what was going to become a State Department headquarters at the Basra airport. Why wouldn't you just keep us? So we were really focused on us, which is, selfish, I guess, because we were a little bit about it, but we were very much like, hey, we're going to keep coming until they tell us no. Right. And yeah, I mean, I can see where Azeez is bitter because we knew they weren't ready. Like we
What,
knew.
what did it look like were you there to turn out the lights? I mean, were you the last guys there? When you left, that was it?
I left, the MiTT team closed. The MiTT team for the Basra Area Operations Command closed. We left I think it was the night of November. Shit, I can't believe it's escaping me now because it comes up on my Facebook reminders. I'm like, oh yeah, that was the day we left. Um,
What was
it was
that
like
like? What did that
beginning of
look like?
November. It was, it was gradual, Tony. It was, we got told that we're drawing down and that we were the last group that was living with the Iraqis. So we had a group that was just north of us, the Mid Euphrates Operations Command. They never lived with their guys. They were always being helicoptered in for their meetings with so they didn't have a very big relationship with their team, right? And I had Air Force friends on that team, and I was like, I don't know how you're doing it. They're like, yeah, most of the time we're just playing Xbox because 5 days out of the week we're just sitting in the post with nothing to do.
Yeah.
So for us it was different because we were, Bosch was the southernmost large city, and so we were the most integrated still. We were going to see them every day. We were living with them. We were, after hours we were with them. We had our interpreters that were living on the economy, right? So because Azeez stayed on base most of the time, but even he left to go get us stuff from out on the economy from the markets and stuff. And so like we were integrated. We were like, well, why would you pull us back? Even if you want to pull us onto the State Department compound, we got that, but we should still be able to go out and help these folks, or they can come on the post,
Yeah.
and we can still do this advising thing. But it became more and more like, no, you guys are leaving. We're like, we're stopping this,
Was
right?
it kind of I mean, you talked about Barack Obama earlier, and I mentioned it during a podcast with Aziz. I remember that election, and really one of the pillars of his election was we're going to get out of Iraq. It was a mistake. We're bringing all of our boys home, and he was popularly elected on
Yeah.
that message. So, did you feel like some of it was just, hey, this is what this president said we're going to do, and it's got to happen. We just got to make it happen.
Yeah, but I mean, it was also the part of like you knew it wasn't going to go smoothly. You knew it was going to fall
Amen.
apart,
Yeah.
right? Like you knew, like it was like you're there and you're like, yeah, I agree. Like we probably got into this the wrong way. We went about this the wrong way, but we're here now and we've done enough to this country for the negative. And here's a team that's
Building.
positive and is
Yeah.
getting results. Why would you pull us out? But it was part of greater policy. And I'll tell you what we did that was really screwed up, right? So we thought we were staying, and we thought we were staying like I say, like October, we left the Bayock right downtown, and we had our last convoy into the base, and we thought we were going to be convoying back out to them. And so, as everybody else on the base is drawing down, we're taking stuff.
Mm.
So we went from beg borrowing, and like we would convoy into the main base once a week, drop our gear, get Azeez a coffee, right? Because he was there to talk to the Iraqi police force, get him a coffee at Green Beans, get him some chow, get him, go into the chow hall, get him some chow, poop on a real toilet, all that stuff that we couldn't do, you know, at the Bayock. We would do all that stuff once a week. And we just assumed, well, it's just going to go the way our buddies up north have been doing this forever. It's like, instead of it being once a week, we go poop on the nice toilet. We get to poop on the nice toilet 6 days a week, and we go on the porta potties 1 day a week up here at the Bayock. Like nothing's really going to change. And we started acquiring stuff because it's like, well, now if we're on the main base, we should probably have trucks. We should probably have computers and printers. So we spent September and October acquiring stuff from units that were leaving. So we're grabbing stuff. We're like, yeah, bring it
Take it.
on. We had the sacrilege moment, right? We took over the Basra, the main base Basra chapel, which was this big chapel that we had built, wood building, right? Whatever. And me and our intel guy stayed after our weekly convoy to build it up, right? So I'm doing comms things, right? I'm building up networks, making sure we can connect and all that stuff. And the altar of the church was 3 big couches that we had acquired from other people, one of them from the chapel, one of other places, a giant screen TV that we got from the Resilience Center, that was closing, and a bunch of DVDs. So like in the middle of this church, we're watching Rome. the HBO series Rome and you know what that is, right? And
Oh
so
yeah.
we're watching that in the altar, and I just remember our Sergeant Major Rivera going, "You guys are going to fucking hell."
You're all gonna burn.
Yeah, probably, probably true. But so we did that. We did all this acquiring of stuff, and then we got a no kidding around the end of October. They're like, "No, you're leaving, dude. Like, why are you getting all this crap?" Because we were busting deadlines. There was deadlines where you had to turn stuff in.
Yeah.
So we had trucks. We had a truck. We had an F-350 that obviously had been in Iraq since 2003. It was beat to shit, but it had like 20,000 miles on it. I remember just throwing the keys in it one day and
Are
being
you
like,
serious?
hope
That was
somebody
it.
picks it up. Hope somebody picks it up because it's not ours anymore.
Oh
Whereas, and I
wow.
mean, military, right? Property books, taxpayer accounting, right? All that stuff, right? Didn't feel good. The libertarian version of me now does not feel good about what we were doing, but like I acquired all this stuff. And then I'm, it's all this computer equipment too. So now I'm ripping out computer equipment, even stuff that I didn't install in this chapel. Cisco switches, ripping them out, running them through a degausser, throwing them in a fire, throwing them in a burn pit, right? We're just anything that was classified, wipe the computer, take a sledgehammer to it outside, chip my tooth. That's my combat wound. Chip
Yeah.
my tooth, like, smacked the sledgehammer too hard and it came back and hit me in the mouth and destroyed hard drives on the
But
way
you're
out.
you're telling me that instead of this like institutionalized like set of governing things that you do when you leave, it was kind of a no, this is really happening, we're for real, and you guys had to kind of scramble to make it
Oh yeah,
happen.
we were scrambling to get rid of all. Now we're just trying to get rid of all this crap,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
we spent a month acquiring this stuff, thinking we were
Yeah.
going to stay, right?
Yeah.
And look, we did. Like we promised Azeez, like, dude, we're not leaving you behind. We're going to help. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Hell, even our Iraqi soldiers, right? Like Colonel Yahya was like, the day we left the compound, we went, we took pictures, and I went and I sat with him one last time. And I think Azeez was my interpreter for that one. Pretty sure Azeez is my interpreter for that one. And I was like, Curly, I'm gonna miss you. We're gonna see each other again. Inshallah, I'm gonna see you again. You guys are coming in 2 weeks for this. We were gonna have a sort of a send off event. Um, and he's like, it's not safe for you in here anymore. So once you leave, you leave and you contact me, via email or whatever. Um, and that's going to be that, because he's like, look, once you leave here this time, like, it won't be safe for you anymore. And that goes back to, we said no, right? our
Yeah.
last our last thing was, we said no. We said we weren't going to leave, and we left.
Yeah.
And that was it, right? And I have a lot of guilt for that, because like I have Colonel Yaya's name tattooed on my arm. You can't see it, but because 2 years later, when ISIS rolled through, all those guys that we had advised in Basra, they were at the wrong end of whatever political thing it was, right? So, and I don't know how much Azeez knows about this. I know he knows about Colonel Yahya, but like, all of those troops got sent up north to protect oil fields, right? And they're all dead.
I didn't
They're
know
all dead.
that.
They're all
Really?
almost all of them are dead. I would contend all of them are dead. I shouldn't say all of them are dead. I know Colonel Yaya's dead,
Oh.
because I had one of the logistics sergeants who wasn't sent up north contacted Major Harmon and Captain Briscoe, both James Briscoe and Christy Harmon, and contacted them and said, hey, a bunch of the guys are dead. They got sent. They were not aligned to the right political side, and they all got sent up to do security, right? And I was like, Colonel Yahya, who had to at that point, be damn near 60 years old. He's in it, he was in his mid 50s when I was watching him, and I already told you, like, he wasn't exactly the most military of military guys. And he got sent up to secure pipelines.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, right? So, like, I mean, that put me in a bad place for a little while. And there was bad family stuff going on as well at the same time in 2014. But like, knowing that all that stuff that we did for those guys, and for me, I cut ties, right? Because having foreign contacts when you're working at the NSA is not a good thing. Like, I was not in contact with Azeez for a very, very long time, because he's not at the time, he wasn't a U.S. citizen. Like, I was the worst, Tony. Like, mea culpa on this podcast, right, is right. I gave them all fake email addresses. I had no intention of contacting anybody after I got back. I feel horrible about it to this day. I've been shed a lot of tears and did a lot of things about it because we weren't coming back. I couldn't help them. I didn't think I could help them without hurting myself, which is a really selfish thing to do. And we've been talking for damn near 2 hours, but like that's the reality. And then to find out all those guys died, and that's when I started reconnecting with everybody on the team again. I called John and told John that Colonel Yahya was dead, because Colonel Yahya was kind of a glue Iraqi for all of us, right? Because he liked the girls, right? We had some ladies on the team, so he's like, oh, make sure you bring the girls next time you have our session. I'm like, yeah, come on, ladies, right? And so like he was kind of like a glue for our team. He was our token Iraqi, is what we'd call him. Azeez was part of us, but he was our token Iraqi army guy, right? When we left the Bayak, we did a little barbecue. He was the only guy we invited, right? The American guys that were with us, that platoon that Azeez talks about, that they lost a guy and they were not happy at the end when we were, bringing the Iraqis in and showing them what they were going to be taking over and showing them the cafeteria and having dinner with them in front. Like we had made a traditional Iraqi dinner for the Iraqis and these young infantry guys who had basically been guarding us the entire time, and they were not amped that the Iraqi army was there. I was like, dude, if you guys haven't noticed, this is what you've been doing. Like, I know you've been going out on patrol and stuff, but like, it's to do this mission. It's to support this headquarters. That's why we've been doing all this, right? I know I'm going all over the place right now, but like it was really, the end was really hard, and it became harder afterwards because of what happened, right? Because of what I feel is my betrayal of those guys, and I still owe Azeez for that, right? Like, all right, we're back home now, and it's like start over again, start the military career, go do the NSA thing, which is what I did, and continue on in your career. And then 2 years later, you get that like, hey, by the way, that thing that you're really proud of, that combat tour that has so many funny stories, like, hey, make sure, one of the rules of engagement was make sure you report any instances of detainee abuse. Tony, it was an Iraqi compound.
Yeah.
I saw detainees tied up, heads in corners every single day. Me and Tita Tucker was one of our NCOs. We walked from lunch on the American side, and we were walking across that 100-yard strip, and a truck comes whizzing by, one of those little Toyota Hiluxes comes whizzing by and slams into park, and a giant 200-millimeter rocket gets thrown out the back. And a guy who's hogtied, who also gets thrown out the back. And we just looked at each other and were like, want to go get another meal?
Well, so was this somebody that got caught with the rocket? They just dumped him off at the compound?
Somebody in whatever tribe locally wanted to turn this dude in to General Mohammed. Now, whether it was actually a guy who got caught with a rocket, whether it was the guys who were shooting the rockets that were just pissed off at the guy for a family dispute like they had in the first place, who knows? All I know is we beat feet back into the American compound, made a quick call over to the guys that were there. I'm like, hey, you guys might want to leave, because I don't know if that round is live or not, but somebody just, like a gun buyback program. It was like the rocket buyback program. It's like, hey, would you take this and this guy who we say did it?
Who is hogtied? Oh my God.
So it's stuff like that, James Briscoe, hopefully you get to interview him. Love that dude. He was my gunner on the ride out. We did get to ride out. So like where I said, like, there isn't a single army person there isn't a single army person who was served in the army during the GWAT who wasn't part of the invasion of Iraq. They all were. Just ask them. They'll tell you. That's my own little service rivalry joke for those guys.
Yep.
Or it seems like it sometimes, right? I'm being sarcastic here.
Yep.
I can say that I drove us out of Iraq. Like,
okay.
I was in the driver's seat of the MRAP. James was in the gun, and we drove out. Our acting team commander was in the seat next to me. We left at 2:00 in the morning, got into Kuwait at like 5:30 in the morning. I remember the team commander being like, "Hey guys," slaps James on the leg, right? So I'm driving. James's legs are hanging right here, and he's next to me in the passenger seat. He's like, "Don't worry, guys," because we had gotten rocketed the night we left the main
Ah,
base of Basra, right? Because they knew we were leaving, right? So we get rocketed. Um, Not our Iraqis, right? But the general population.
right.
We get rocketed, and he's like, "Don't worry, I know you guys were planning on sleeping, but go ahead and I'll be there for you. I'll wake you up." That dude was asleep. That dude was asleep the first speed bump I hit leaving the gate. James and I were by ourselves, right? James and two others got scratched by a cat. Anybody who's in the Bayak, you can go back and ask Azeez about Operation Cat Scratch Fever. They were going to adopt this stupid cat that hung around us when we barbecued. So they found ASPC Basra in 2011. Didn't even know that was a thing, but it was a guy in an old Datsun hatchback who
Yeah.
would put your animal that you had fallen in love with into a thing, and they would do all the medical to them, and then you get to the United States and your cat shows up eventually, right? Sounds
Holy crap.
sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Except when you take like a 6-year-old cat who's deems its territory
Yeah.
to be those sandbag walls. As
Yeah.
soon as they took him out of the walls, he scratched everybody, scratched like 4 people. Number one rule right next to not having alcohol or pornography in theater is don't
Right.
touch the damn animals. We used up all the rabies vaccine in Iraq, our team,
Oh my
in like
gosh.
September. Like
Oh,
they were shipping stuff into Afghanistan. And
yeah.
then we had to spin up, which now seems like a joke, right? But at the time, a couple of us were pissed. It's like, so let me get this straight. You want us to go back and get the cat? And the doctors are like, yeah, we need the cat. We have to check if the cat had rabies. I mean, we're going to treat everybody for rabies, but you guys have to go get the cat. I'm like, we got to do a convoy to bring you a cat?
Oh, that sounds it sounds like pretty much every there's some common themes when you talk to people who have deployed, and you have deployed. You've been talking about it. Um, with the pets, with the insanity, with the
Yeah.
snafus, with the waste, and also what you were saying earlier about, the disconnection. When you leave, you said that you felt a little guilty about that. That is so unbelievably ridiculously common. What
Oh,
I
that's,
think
that's
what I think
I
is
hear that
really,
actually.
no, it really is, right? I mean, people will just say, I'm done with this and I'm going over here and this is opening now. And that's, to me, what I find remarkable is that is that Azeez and you and others have found a chance to reconnect after all of this, that he's here now. So how did you find out that he was either applying for a green card or made it over? How did you guys reconnect after all this?
So right. So after Colonel Yahya died, I kind of, Colonel Yahya died. I was getting divorced from the kids' mom. Um, and it was not pleasant. It was not a pleasant divorce, right? And all this is happening at the same time. Um, and I kind of got into this like, maybe all of this stuff didn't matter, right? It was not a good mindset to be in, but it was the mindset that helped me reconnect with folks, right? Because I knew what was happening with Azeez, right? Because I checked in, I just didn't check in directly, right? Because I didn't want to have that foreign contact, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to have to do another polygraph, right? Because I was always having trouble with polygraphs, right?
Right.
Which, my later career, that's a recurring theme. And I just tell the polygrapher, I was like, dude, I'm going to fail. Like,
Right.
let's get through the questions we can get through. You fail me, I'll go back. I'll come back with the answers for you, and we'll go from there, right?
Yep.
Um, but I sort of just got in this attitude is like, if none of this was worth it and all these guys died, why wouldn't I go find everybody else again, right? Why wouldn't I reconnect? And I was selective, right? Like I reconnected with John, right, who was already American. I reconnected with Azeez, who I really liked. Like I really enjoyed when he was my interpreter, right? And like I know I've told these stories almost from the perspective of that he wasn't there, but it's like anytime I'm telling you a story about me interacting with Colonel Yahya, I'm interacting with him through Azeez, or I'm interacting with him through John. So it's like it's a two-way conversation with a third person there, right? So Azeez knows everything. So like we talk afterwards and we'd be like kind of after action stuff and be like, hey man, how did that go? Right? How did this work out? Do you think he understood? What do you get from that? Right. And so getting back to that, when I found out, I knew Azeez was applying for his green card. And I was just sort of like, okay, well, let's see, let's see how it goes, right? I think he was talking to James a lot, and I was talking kind of to him through James, and I was just like, I hope when he gets here, we can reconnect again, those kind of things. And then, part of it was maturity on my part when I got to a point right around 2015, 2016, a couple years removed, obviously like almost 5 years removed now, and I knew he was in the States. And then I think David or James had told me that, hey, he's got his citizenship now. And I was like, you know what? Like, it's time to be. I had the open friend request on Facebook. Like he had asked to be my friend like 3 years ago, and I never said no, but I never said yes. And I was like, you know what? It's you need to connect with these people because like he was important to you. You really liked him. He was good to you. Like, why would you not make that connection? And I feel like it comes off really poorly. I feel really bad about how that it took me that long to get there again. But it was just like, it was getting to a point of maturity and trust in myself that like that part of life, that combat tour was really important. And Azeez was really important, right? He did more. He sacrificed way more than I ever did. Like I just went on a deployment like I was supposed to. That dude chose to work with us. He chose us.
He became a
Like,
traitor in his own country to do that.
yeah,
And
he chose
yeah.
us all, like, and he would tell us about like how people were messing with him, right? He would talk about like people messing with his family. Now, he never gave us specifics, right? Because he didn't want to get us too tied in it either, I don't think.
Yep.
Right? Because he still had a job to do. But yeah, I mean, you know, he would like, he's like, hey, do you want, he's like, you want some food from the market, right? I love Middle Eastern food, right? So he would go down, like he'd go down and get us food from the market, right? At peril to himself, right? And I stopped talking to him because I'm worried about a little clearance thing. That's stupid, right? But it took me a long time to get there. It was really dumb. Took losing Colonel Yaya. It took a lot of stuff happening in personal life to be like, man, good connections like Azeez, you don't throw away. And the fact that he's so willing, even after all of that, to still be a friend. And I've told him this in person. I was like, Azeez, like, there's no reason you should hate my guts sometimes because of I should have been there for you. I should have been helping you get your green card, and I wasn't. And I
He doesn't feel that way though.
I know he doesn't, but man, that's again, it's a testament to him. He's got such great character. Like character more than I can come to, and I don't think that a lot of Americans can understand. Like he's really special in that regard. Like he's really, really special in that regard.
Well, I for one am thankful that I had the chance meeting with Azeez. He talks about the best time in his life was, being with you guys. And he is the type, I think he shows the gratitude of a newly minted American that I
Really
think
does.
he does that I think a lot of
Really
Americans
does.
felt a century ago, and maybe
Yeah,
some of the ones coming up from Mexico feel that way now.
yeah.
I don't know,
I don't
but
know.
it was so refreshing to hear someone, and especially today, as you know, there's a lot of divisive things that are going on, even more so than the typical background divisiveness that
Oh
we've
yeah.
always had. To have him say, hey man, it's, being an American is not about that. It's about all the amazing things we have that people just take for granted.
And
um
talking to Aziz too, it's like you realize too that we kind of won the genetic lottery.
yeah. Yeah, yeah,
I listen to the podcast where they talk about Americans, like, and as an American, you should thank God every day because you kind of won the genetic lottery just showing up here.
yeah,
Right.
yeah, you made the country
He's
better.
earned it. He's
Yeah.
had to earn it.
I
And he knows it way, but he knows that freedom way better than we do. Right. And that's why I'll do anything for that guy. I've told him, I was like, when you're ready to go in the Navy, you've got probably 50 American officers who are going to write you these glowing recommendations when it's time for him to be in the Navy. He's he's such a treasure for us to have. Like, and all those guys, right? He brought up the idea of them getting some sort of status, right?
Yeah,
I don't know if it's full veteran status, but it needs to be something. Like
I
there needs to
agree.
be some sort of recognition because I mean you know, you talk about all the guys in Afghanistan after how 2021 went down, and obviously that wasn't how things should have went, right? I'm thankful that the guys that wanted to get out, I think they all got out
Mm.
of our guys, right?
I sure
So,
I sure hope so. I mean,
yeah,
when I got to know Azeez, and then I think back to these things that have happened in Iraq, and then more recently Afghanistan. And of course, as we mentioned in the podcast, there's been a couple of movies that have come out on it. I mean, there's people like you who served with these people who have created enough awareness for this that it's made it to the point where Jake Gyllenhaal is making movies about it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah, it is.
To me, it reminds me a little bit of the awakening that the Americans had 10 or 15 years after the Vietnam War for the POW movement, for the MIA movement, where it went from the being this thing that no one really talked about to being kind of celebrated.
Yeah,
And I'd like to see, in my view, people like Azeez and the people that played those roles supporting people like you, and
yeah,
by extension me over there.
yeah.
I'd like to see them celebrated as well.
Well, I completely agree, right? I think, you know, those guys, um it's just so it's so important what they did, right? Because I mean, I couldn't have had that conversation, right? I couldn't have talked to Colonel Yaya without Azeez, right? I couldn't have had the stories, right? I couldn't have the computer recovery story. I couldn't have, you know, stories about the cat and stuff, right? I wouldn't have those stories without Azeez, right? Or I'd have them, but it would just be, you know, yeah, I had this Iraqi guy. I didn't know what he said. And
Yeah, we did some hand signals and shit, and he left, and
yeah,
I don't
yeah.
know
It's
what
like
happened.
we were waving hands at each other, and I was handing him comms equipment. You know, I mean, it's, you know, it's one of those deals where it's just like, man, it's it's a big deal, and he deserves some recognition for it. They all do. I mean, Bill does. John and Abe. I mean, they made it. John, Abe, and Hyder. Those were the three American interpreters we had. You know, they made a choice too,
Yeah.
right? They made a choice as American citizens to come over. Now they got compensated pretty handsomely for it, but at the same time, right? Nobody asked to go into a combat zone without getting compensated handsomely. So I'm not holding it against them, and they do deserve some status. Like John did that for 10 years. John would jump
Oh,
in with guys, you know, go in and out, help guys at training. He would play the op for whatever he could do as an Arab American to support his country, doing that work and being in his 50s, right? Always at the gym, always with the gold chain. Saw him 2 years ago, went to his house 2 years ago, pulled up to my hotel, BMW 5 Series, completely tight shirt, gold chains. I was like, God, John, you look exactly the same. You look exactly the same.
so
And,
let's talk about let's wrap up with this, and
uh,
so what are you doing now? How were you able to take anything you learned from being in the Air Force or whatnot to apply now? What sort of things you
oh
working
yeah,
on
yeah.
now?
Yeah, so I mean, you know, I kept going, right? I retired from the Air Force in 2022.
Okay.
It got real spooky after that, right? It was a lot of NSA and cybercom things, and I did all the stuff you're supposed to do. I commanded a unit. What Iraq and that experience with Azeez gave me, though, was a respect for culture that I didn't have, and it was a respect for how people live. It was pretty conservative growing up, and I probably fell into that realm a little bit. But Iraq, all those deployments, the four, because I did one more after that was not combat related, it was NSA related, but all the deployments gave me a respect for culture that was really different, right? In Iraq, everybody holds hands, right? I was holding hands with Colonel Yaya all the time, right?
Hmm.
You get back to the States and you find that one soldier who's super homophobic, and you're like, dude, like, I
Yeah.
mean, we messed with the guy at NSA every time. Me and another guy who had done a bunch of special ops time, we would walk up to him holding hands because we knew it bothered him. But that's like, hey man, like, you, it's just the culture, dude. Like,
Yeah.
you got to let it go. Like, you got to let all that stuff go. That carried with me a lot of like, people are really different, and cultures are really different, and whatever you believe or think doesn't really matter. I mean, I don't. I know Azeez has some beers now, right? And I know he did then, but he was not looked upon kindly for doing that.
Yeah.
You know, I I may or may not have had some blackjack Iraqi whiskey that looks like Jack Daniels, but it's definitely not Jack Daniels, brought in by Azeez for us. You know,
Right.
um, like things that I didn't get to that I wouldn't have experienced, and I'll be honest, I judge other soldiers sometimes too. So soldiers, sailors, and airmen. It was like, you didn't get that experience. Like, you really need that experience. And you see a lot of those guys at NSA. I had a neighbor who was a Pashto linguist who never went to Afghanistan.
Oh,
He had a headset like yours on, and he was listening to communications at NSA for 10 years, right? And doing war work, but not to that extent.
well,
You froze on me, or I froze, one of the
no,
two.
no, we're still there. It's recording. Steve, I really appreciate you not only taking the time
Sorry,
to
I took
talk with me
2 hours of your
about
time.
this.
That was not the intent, man.
It was awesome. The ones I worry about is when we sit down and in 15 minutes I ask them 3 questions and you're done. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. You're just I think you were saying that you were in the Springs because probably the Air Force thing. You said you lived in Littleton now? Uh-oh. Uh-oh, did you hear me? Did I pause and break up?
I heard the one, and then I lost you. So whatever you said was probably really smart and intelligent, and I didn't
Nope.
catch it.
It probably wasn't. I basically want to say is I want to meet for beer.
Okay.
So I mean,
It's
if
hard for
you
me. That's all. I'm sorry. Like, I tried, and that's why this was easier. But yeah, we
no,
can at some
no,
point.
so some I mean any sort of time like when you're in the Denver area, it doesn't matter where it is. If you're gonna have a few hours, it can be a
Yeah,
beer, it can be a Coca-Cola. I don't really care what it is, but I wouldn't mind meeting you, and I really appreciate
really
you,
appreciate it.
spending a couple of hours with us. This is great, and
I'm
I've
glad
got a
it.
better. It was just really cool to hear kind of both sides of the same experience, to hear where Azeez was with this, and the side from the American servicemen as well. So, is there anything else that you'd like to say that we haven't had a chance to talk about?
I really appreciate what you guys are doing. Taking stories from guys like me. I hope you hit up. I hope if this is a recurring theme for you guys, I hope you hit, and Aziz is as popular as he is, as he should be. I hope you guys hit up a couple of the other folks on the team too. John would be a great one. John's got stories going back to the Lebanese Civil War. So he'd be one I'd definitely reach out to that guy. That guy's got an interesting life, and I don't even know the half of it. James Briscoe too, survived cancer. Like, we didn't even get into that, but like, survived cancer, had an embolism on an airplane, pulmonary embolism on an airplane after recovering from cancer. And then he was with us 3 years later.
My God.
Wild story, right? He's a great person to talk to as well. And I could try to hook you up with those guys too if you need help, just like Aziz did for hooking us up. So
I would like that. I'd like to meet these people. Aziz said the same thing with the same names and another name that he mentioned I'd written down that we haven't talked about. But I just
Steve Cooper. Steve
yeah,
Cooper would be a
that's
big one
it.
too.
And
Steve
that's
Cooper.
it. Yeah, the
So
other
Steve,
Steve.
so Steve Cooper was before me. So I overlapped with Steve for 2 months. What a genuine dude. Would run around the Bayok perimeter with his weapon every day. So like carried his, like, I never did that. I ran around the American compound like 100 laps or whatever to do my runs. But he's like, yeah, no, I'm going on around the outer compound, and he would be out there with his 9mm, just like running along. Great dude. I guess part of being at the Bayok was you had to have a really idiosyncratic personality, I guess.
Well,
But yeah,
it sounds like they brought some really interesting people into the MiTTs team. I mean, uh,
we
I
we
think
were
I think I think at some point there's gonna be a book written about some of this stuff.
Oh yeah, there's a July 4th story that I didn't get to either, that I thought I was going to get to, that's quite good as well. But that's maybe another time, maybe over beers. Probably that one's probably not for public consumption with the Library of Congress, Tony.
All right. Well, Steve, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording right now.
Yep. Okay.